When the auction hammer fell for the last time that day, Eliza Boone stood unsold on the workhouse platform, too big, too damaged, worth less than a broken mule. The crowd was already dispersing when a shadow fell across the town square. The mountain man had come down from Raven Ridge. What happened next would tear Copper Hollow apart, expose buried secrets that powerful men wanted dead, and prove that some debts can only be paid in blood. But before we get there, I need you to do something. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. And stick with me until the end. Because what you're about to hear, nobody saw coming. The sun beat down on Copper Hollow like a punishment from an angry sky, turning the dirt street into something close to clay and making the air thick enough to choke on. It was the kind of heat that made men mean and women desperate, the kind that brought out the worst in people who already didn't have much good to begin with. Sheriff Tom Barrett stood in the shade of the general store awning, arms crossed over his barrel chest, watching the crowd gather in the town square. He'd seen this spectacle twice before. The workhouse auction, they called it, though there wasn't much work and even less house involved. It was just a fancy name for selling off girls nobody wanted anymore. Girls who'd aged out of the orphanage. Girls who'd gotten into trouble. Girls whose families had died or disappeared or simply couldn't afford another mouth to feed. The territory didn't much care what happened to them after that. Shameful business, muttered Doc Hendricks beside him, though the old physician made no move to leave or protest. That was Copper Hollow in a nutshell. Plenty of folks with opinions, precious few willing to do anything about them. It's the law, Barrett said, which was what he always said when something sat wrong in his gut. But doing something about it would cause more trouble than ignoring it. He'd learned that lesson early in his career. The territory needed order more than it needed justice, and sometimes those two things didn't shake hands. The auction platform had been erected in the center of the square, rough pine boards hammered together without much care for craftsmanship. Behind it, the Rocky Mountains rose up like the broken teeth of some ancient giant, their peaks still holding snow even in late June. Copper Hollow sat in the valley between those peaks and the high desert beyond, which meant it got the worst of both worlds, freezing winters and scorching summers, with maybe 3 weeks of pleasant weather scattered somewhere in between. Victor Grange emerged from the Gold Strike Hotel, straightening his silk vest and checking his pocket watch with the kind of casual authority that came from owning half the valley. The railroad agent was a lean man with gray temples and eyes that calculated profit the way other men calculated distance or weight. He'd come to Copper Hollow 6 months ago with plans to run a spur line through the territory, and since then he'd been buying up land and mineral rights like a man playing poker with marked cards. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Grange said pleasantly, tipping his hat. "Doctor, hell of a day for it." "Hell of a day for what?" Doc Hendricks asked, though everyone knew the answer. "Commerce," Grange said, smiling without warmth. "The territory's growing. Got to make sure everyone finds their proper place in the new order of things." Barrett didn't respond. He'd stopped trusting Victor Grange around the same time he'd realized the railroad agent's business interests seemed to align suspiciously well with every legal decision the territorial judge made. But proving suspicion and acting on it were two different animals entirely. The crowd had swelled to maybe 70 people now, most of them men, ranchers, miners, shopkeepers, drifters looking for cheap labor or cheaper companionship. A few wives stood near the back, faces tight with disapproval, but present nonetheless. In Copper Hollow, public spectacle trumped private morality every single time. Reverend Paul took his position beside the platform, Bible in hand, ready to bless whatever transaction occurred with the authority of heaven. The Reverend was a small man with a large voice, the kind who could make sin sound like salvation if you paid him enough. Barrett had never liked him. "Bring out the merchandise," someone shouted, and laughter rippled through the assembly. The workhouse matron, Mrs. Calhoun, appeared from the converted barn that served as temporary holding. She was a thick woman with a face like a shovel and the disposition of a wounded bear. 3 girls followed her, their heads down, hands clasped in front of them like they were walking to their own funerals. Maybe they were. The first girl was maybe 16, blonde, pretty enough in a used-up sort of way. The bidding started at $5 and climbed to $20 before a mine foreman from the Silver Bell claim bought her contract for 3 years of domestic service. The girl didn't look up once during the entire transaction. She just shuffled off the platform and followed the foreman toward his wagon, like a sleepwalker. The second girl went for $12 to a rancher's wife who needed help with 6 children under the age of 10. That one might actually end up all right, Barrett thought. The rancher's wife was hard but fair, and the girl looked sturdy enough to handle the work. Then came the third girl, and the mood shifted. Eliza Boone wasn't like the others. Where they were small and defeated, she was broad-shouldered and tall. Nearly 6 feet, Barrett guessed, with the kind of frame you got from hard labor and harder living. Her face was smudged with coal dust. Her hands were scarred and calloused, and her dark hair had been hacked short like someone had used a knife instead of scissors. She wore a man's work shirt that hung loose over her frame and canvas pants that had seen better decades. She didn't lower her eyes like the other girls. She stared straight ahead at nothing, her jaw set, her expression blank as riverstone. "Last one," Mrs. Calhoun announced without enthusiasm. Eliza Boone, 22 years old, strong back, knows her way around livestock and field work. "What the hell happened to her?" someone called out, and the crowd erupted in laughter. "Looks like she lost a fight with a thresher," another voice added. "I wouldn't let that thing near my livestock," a third man shouted. "Might scare the horses." The jokes came faster then, each one crueler than the last, and Eliza just stood there taking it like she'd been taking things her whole life, silent, immovable, waiting for it to be over. "Who'll start the bidding?" Mrs. Calhoun asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Silence. The crowd had gone from jeering to disinterested in the span of a heartbeat. A few men turned away entirely, heading back toward the saloons or the general store. Even the ones who'd come specifically for the auction seemed to have lost their appetite. "Anyone?" Mrs. Calhoun tried again. More silence. Victor Grange chuckled softly beside Barrett. Poor creature, nobody wants damaged goods. Something hot and angry flashed in Barrett's chest, but he swallowed it down. What was he supposed to do? Buy her himself? He had a wife and 3 kids and a salary that barely covered beans and bacon. The world was full of tragedy you couldn't fix with good intentions. "Going once," Mrs. Calhoun said, sounding almost relieved. If nobody bought the girl, she'd end up right back in the workhouse, which meant Mrs. Calhoun could put her to work for free instead of splitting the auction proceeds with the territory. "Going twice?" The crowd parted. Not willingly, people were pushed aside, stumbling out of the way of something that moved through them like a boulder rolling downhill. Conversations died mid-sentence. The entire square went quiet, except for the sound of heavy boots on packed dirt and the nervous whinny of a horse sensing predator nearby. Garrick Hale stepped into the clearing around the platform. Barrett felt his jaw tighten. He'd heard the stories about the mountain man, same as everyone else in the territory. How Garrick had survived 3 winters alone in the Blackstone Peaks after his trapping partner died in an avalanche. How he'd killed a grizzly bear with nothing but a hunting knife when his rifle misfired. How he'd walked into a Ute war camp to retrieve a stolen horse and walked back out alive with the horse and a scar that ran from his left temple to his jawline. Most of those stories were probably bullshit. But looking at Garrick Hale now, Barrett could almost believe them. The man was enormous. 6.5 feet if he was an inch, with shoulders like an ox yoke and hands that could palm a man's skull. His beard was shot through with gray despite him being maybe 40 years old, and his face looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who'd lost interest halfway through. He wore buckskin leggings, a heavy wool shirt despite the heat, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his eyes. Those eyes, though. Barrett had seen them once before, 3 years back when Garrett came down from the mountains to trade furs and salt pork. They were the color of winter ice on a deep lake, pale blue-gray and completely unreadable. "Christ," Doc Hendricks whispered. Garrick walked straight to the auction platform without acknowledging anyone in the crowd. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a single silver dollar, and placed it on the platform edge with a soft clink that somehow carried across the entire square. Then he looked directly at Eliza Boone for the first time. She stared back. Something passed between them. Not words, not gestures, just a moment of recognition that Barrett couldn't quite name. Like 2 people who'd both been to the same terrible place and could see it in each other's eyes. "I'll take her," Garrick said. His voice was rough from disuse, the words coming out slow and deliberate like he wasn't accustomed to speaking around people. The silence stretched out until it became uncomfortable, then unbearable, then finally broke apart as someone in the crowd started laughing. Within seconds, half the square was roaring with it, great whooping guffaws of disbelief and mockery. "Mountain Man finally cracked," someone shouted. "Went crazy up there after all," another added. "Match made in hell, that is." Garrick didn't react, didn't turn his head, didn't change expression, didn't acknowledge the laughter existed. He just stood there waiting for Mrs. Calhoun to finish the transaction. The matron looked at Sheriff Barrett, uncertainty plain on her face. Barrett shrugged. The law didn't require a man to be sane to enter a contract, just solvent. And the silver dollar sitting on the platform was legal tender same as any other. "Sold," Mrs. Calhoun said, snatching the coin before anyone could object. "To Mr. Hale." Garrick moved toward the platform steps. Eliza still hadn't moved, hadn't changed expression, hadn't given any indication she cared who bought her or for what purpose. But as Garrick reached the top of the platform, she took one small step backward. "Easy," Garrick said quietly, so quietly Barrett barely heard it over the continued laughter of the crowd. "Not here to hurt you." Eliza's eyes narrowed slightly, searching his face for the lie she clearly expected to find there. Barrett watched her jaw work like she wanted to say something but had forgotten how words worked. Then Garrick did something that silenced the crowd more effectively than any gunshot could have. He knelt, went down on one knee right there on the platform, this enormous man who looked like he could tear a door off its hinges, and he lowered himself so his eyes were level with Eliza's instead of towering above her. "My cabin's up on Raven Ridge," he said, still in that quiet, rough voice. 6 hours north by wagon. It's isolated, hard country, but there's food and shelter and nobody bothers you up there." He paused. "I'm not buying a slave or a wife or anything else. I'm buying a contract to get you out of this place. What happens after that's your choice. You can stay, you can leave, you can do whatever you damn well please. But right now, I'm offering you a chance to get away from these people." Eliza stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded once. Garrick stood, turned, and walked back down the platform steps. After a brief hesitation, Eliza followed him. The crowd parted again, whispers replacing laughter now, people trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. Barrett watched Garrick lift Eliza into the bed of his wagon with surprising gentleness, then climb up onto the driver's bench himself. The wagon was loaded with supplies, flour sacks, salt pork, tools, blankets. Looked like Garrick had been planning to stock up for the winter. Now he had one more piece of cargo. As the wagon rolled past the sheriff's station, Garrick's ice-colored eyes met Barrett's for just a second. There was no challenge in them, no defiance, no explanation, just acknowledgement that Barrett existed and had chosen to do nothing. Barrett looked away first. The wagon disappeared up the mountain road, dust rising behind it in the afternoon heat. The crowd dispersed gradually, heading back to their lives and their gossip, already spinning the story into something they could tell in saloons and general stores. The mountain man and the ugly girl. What a joke. What a waste of a silver dollar. Victor Grange was the last to leave the square. He stood staring up at the mountain road for a long time, his expression thoughtful in a way that made Barrett's instincts prickle with warning. "Something on your mind?" Barrett asked. Grange turned, that cold smile back in place. "Just thinking about property rights, Sheriff, and how quickly things can change when you don't keep proper documentation." He tipped his hat. "Good day." Barrett watched him go, that uncomfortable feeling in his gut growing stronger. Victor Grange didn't make casual observations. Everything the man said was calculated, measured, designed to serve whatever long game he was playing. But that wasn't Barrett's problem. Not yet, anyway. He turned and headed back to his office, leaving the empty auction platform behind. Up in the mountains, Garrick Hale guided his wagon along the narrow switchback trail that led to Raven Ridge. The horses knew the path by heart, which was good because Garrick's attention was split between the road ahead and the woman sitting silent in the wagon bed behind him. She hadn't spoken since leaving town, hadn't asked questions, hadn't protested, hadn't done anything except sit there with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the mountains like they might hold answers. Garrick understood silence, had spent years cultivating it, living in it, using it as both shield and weapon against a world that demanded too many words for things better left unspoken. If Eliza Boone wanted to sit quiet for the entire 6-hour journey, that was fine by him. The trail climbed steadily, leaving behind the scrub brush and scattered pines of the lower elevation for the thick forest that covered the mountain's flanks. The air grew cooler, cleaner, carrying the smell of running water and alpine meadow instead of dust and human habitation. Around hour 3, Eliza finally spoke. Why? One word, but it carried the weight of 100 questions behind it. Garrick considered his answer carefully. He wasn't good with words, never had been. His father used to say Garrick could spend a month in town without using up a week's worth of talking, and that was back when he'd still lived around people regular-like. Seemed like you needed getting out of there, he said finally. That's not a reason. It is for me. Silence again, longer this time. The wagon crested a ridge and the view opened up. The valley spreading out below them like a crumpled blanket, Copper Hollow just a collection of toy buildings in the distance, the mountains marching away in every direction under the vast blue sky. What do you want from me? Eliza asked. Nothing. Everybody wants something. Garrick pulled the wagon to a halt, set the brake, and turned on the bench to look at her properly. She met his gaze without flinching, though her hands were clenched tight enough that her knuckles had gone white. I spent 5 years trapping these mountains with a partner named Samuel Cord, Garrick said. Good man. Best friend I ever had. We made a pact. If anything happened to one of us, the other would settle debts and right wrongs where they could be righted. He paused, choosing words carefully. Sam died 4 winters back, froze to death on the North Face during a storm that came up sudden. Before he went, he made me promise something. What? That I'd help people who needed helping. When I could. How I could. Garrick turned back to the reins. Today you needed helping, so I helped. You don't know me. Don't need to. I could be dangerous. Could be a murderer. Could rob you blind first chance I get. Garrick released the brake and clicked to the horses. The wagon started moving again. Could be, he agreed, but I don't think you are. Why not? Because dangerous people don't stand quiet while a whole town laughs at them. They fight or they run or they make excuses. You did none of those things. You just endured. He guided the horses around a fallen log. That takes a different kind of strength. Eliza was quiet for a long time after that. The cabin appeared as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. It sat in a natural clearing on the ridge, surrounded by tall pines and aspens that would turn gold come autumn. The structure itself was solid, rough-hewn logs chinked with clay and moss, a stone chimney that rose straight and true, windows with actual glass panes that caught the afternoon light. Behind it stood a small barn, a chicken coop, a root cellar dug into the hillside, and a spring that fed a wooden trough before spilling away down the mountain. It wasn't fancy, but it was sturdy and well-maintained, the kind of place a person could survive winter in without suffering too badly. Garrick pulled the wagon up to the cabin and climbed down. He started unloading supplies without comment, carrying flour sacks and tools into the cabin with the easy efficiency of long practice. Eliza sat in the wagon bed, looking around at her new surroundings with an expression Garrick couldn't quite read. There's a spare room inside, he said, nodding toward the cabin. Small, but the roof don't leak, and there's a real bed. Outhouse is behind the barn. Spring water's good for drinking. Help yourself to food whenever you're hungry. He set down a crate of tinned goods. You want to work? There's always work needs doing. You want to rest? Then rest. You want to leave? He met her eyes. Trail's right there. Nobody's keeping you. Eliza climbed down from the wagon slowly, like someone testing the ground to see if it would hold her weight. She walked to the cabin door, hesitated, then pushed it open and stepped inside. Garrick finished unloading and tended to the horses. By the time he came back inside, full dark had fallen, and he'd lit the oil lamps that hung from ceiling hooks. Eliza stood in the main room, still wearing her coat, looking at everything with those careful, suspicious eyes. The cabin's interior was simple but clean. A table and 2 chairs. A stone fireplace with a cooking pot hung on an iron arm. Shelves lined with books, more than you'd expect from a mountain man, including some with titles in languages Garrick couldn't read, but had inherited from Sam Cord's mysterious past. The main room opened into a smaller bedroom where Garrick slept, and a door to the left led to the spare room he'd mentioned. Stew's in the pot from this morning, Garrick said, moving to the fireplace. Should still be good. Bread's wrapped in cloth on the shelf. He served up 2 bowls without asking, set one on the table for Eliza, and took his own to the chair by the window. He ate mechanically, focused more on watching the darkness outside than the food in front of him. Old habit from too many years alone. Eliza approached the table like it might be a trap. She sat down slowly, picked up the spoon, and took a small bite of the stew. Then another. Then she ate with the kind of focused intensity that told Garrick she hadn't had a proper meal in recent memory. When she finished, she looked up at him. "Where's the rope?" Garrick frowned. "What rope?" "The one you're going to use to tie me up. Keep me from running." "There isn't one." "Then where do you keep your gun?" "In the bedroom." "Why?" "So I know where you'll go when you decide to use it." Garrick set down his bowl and studied her face. There was no fear there, just cold calculation. She was planning, strategizing, trying to predict violence before it arrived so she could maybe survive it. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "That's what they all say." "Who's they?" Eliza's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter. They're dead now." The weight of those words settled into the room like smoke. Garrick recognized the tone, the flatness that came from stating facts too painful to carry emotion anymore. "Anyone comes up here trying to hurt you," Garrick said slowly, "they'll have to go through me first, and I'm harder to get through than most." Something flickered in Eliza's eyes. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the possibility of trust somewhere down the road. She stood up, took her bowl to the wash basin, and cleaned it without being asked. Then she walked to the spare room, paused in the doorway, and looked back at him. "Thank you," she said. The words came out rusty, like she wasn't used to saying them. "You're welcome," Garrick replied. She closed the door. Garrick heard the scrape of furniture being moved, the chair wedged under the door handle, the bed pushed against the wall, barricading herself in. He didn't take offense. If he'd been through whatever had put that look in her eyes, he'd do the same. Garrick banked the fire, extinguished most of the lamps, and retreated to his own room. He didn't sleep much that first night. Every small sound had him alert, listening, ready to move if Eliza decided to run or if trouble came calling. But the night passed quiet except for the wind in the pines and the occasional call of an owl hunting the meadow. Morning came gray and soft, mist rising from the valley below like the earth breathing. Garrick rose before dawn out of habit, dressed, and went outside to check on the animals. When he came back inside, Eliza was already up. She'd made coffee somehow, found the grounds and the pot, and figured out how to use the fireplace for something besides heat. She stood by the window holding a tin cup, staring out at the mountains. "Sleep all right?" Garrick asked. "No." Honest, at least. "Takes time," he said, pouring himself coffee. "Getting used to new places. I've been in a lot of new places. Never got used to any of them." Garrick sipped his coffee and waited. He'd learned patience from the mountains. Everything happened in its own time, including conversations. "The workhouse was my fourth placement," Eliza said finally, still not looking at him. "Before that was the Sanderson Ranch. Before that was the Miller Farm. Before that was the orphanage where I grew up." She paused. Each place was supposed to be different. Each place turned out the same. What happened? Men with hands that don't know how to stay to themselves. Women who look the other way because it's easier than causing trouble. Work that breaks your back and pays nothing. Her voice was flat, factual. "The Sandersons' oldest son cornered me in the barn one night. I broke his nose with a shovel. They sent me away. The Millers tried to dock my meals because I wouldn't share a bed with their foreman. I left before they could starve me out. The workhouse..." She trailed off, shook her head. "The workhouse was just the end of the line. Place you go when nobody wants you anymore." Garrick set down his coffee. "That why you look like you expect me to turn monster any minute?" "Every man turns eventually." "Not every man." Eliza turned to face him then, and her eyes held something fierce and broken all at once. "Name one who didn't." Garrick met her gaze steadily. "Sam Cord, my trapping partner. He found me half dead from exposure my first winter in the mountains. Brought me back to his cabin, nursed me back to health, taught me how to survive up here. Spent 5 years working beside me without ever asking for anything except fair partnership and honest work." He paused. "Sam was a good man. They exist. Just rare enough that finding one feels like luck instead of reasonable expectation." "He's dead, you said. Doesn't make him less good." Eliza looked away, but not before Garrick saw something shift in her expression. Not belief, but the crack where belief might eventually grow. They fell into an uneasy routine over the following days. Garrick went about his normal work, checking trap lines, mending fences, cutting timber for winter fuel. Eliza watched him warily for the first few days, keeping distance between them, sleeping with her door barricaded. But slowly, incrementally, she began to participate. First, she fed the chickens without being asked. Then she hauled water from the spring. Then she started helping with larger tasks, holding boards while Garrick hammered, mucking out the barn, harvesting vegetables from the small garden plot. She was strong, Garrick noticed, stronger than most men he'd worked with. She could hoist a 50-pound feed sack like it weighed nothing and swing an axe with enough force to split logs in single strokes. The workhouse, and whatever came before it, had given her that, the kind of physical power that came from years of brutal labor. They didn't talk much. Garrick wasn't inclined toward conversation, and Eliza seemed to prefer silence. But occasionally, in the evenings when the day's work was done and they sat with coffee or stew, small pieces of information would emerge. Her parents had died when she was 6, cholera outbreak that swept through a mining camp. She barely remembered them. She could read, which surprised Garrick, until she explained that a schoolteacher at the orphanage had taught her in secret, believing education was wasted on girls, but willing to make an exception for one who showed aptitude. She'd never been farther than 50 miles from Copper Hollow, had never seen the ocean or a real city or even a train, though she'd heard them in the distance. In return, Garrick told her small things about his own past, growing up in Missouri, heading west after the war, meeting Sam Cord and learning to trap, the quiet beauty of winter in the high peaks when snow muffled the world into silence. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Eliza stopped barricading her door at night, started sitting at the table instead of standing by the window, began to relax incrementally, her shoulders losing some of their permanent tension, her eyes softening from constant vigilance to occasional wariness. Garrick caught himself noticing things about her he hadn't before. The way she hummed softly while working, tuneless melodies she probably didn't realize she was making. How she was careful with small things, gentle with the chickens, and precise when handling tools. The rare smile that sometimes appeared when she succeeded at a difficult task, quick and genuine before disappearing behind her usual guarded expression. One evening in the 4th week, they sat outside watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Eliza had made bread that afternoon, her first attempt at baking, and it had turned out surprisingly well. They ate it warm with butter while the day cooled into evening. "I need to tell you something," Eliza said suddenly. Garrick waited. She was quiet for a long moment, her hands gripping the bread like an anchor. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I have a son." Of all the things Garrick had expected her to say, that wasn't on the list. He kept his face neutral, his voice calm. "All right. He's 5 years old. His name is Caleb." She was staring straight ahead now, not looking at Garrick. "He's been living with a trader named Marcus Finch since I went to the workhouse. He's a good man, takes care of children for people who can't, but it's temporary, always temporary." "Where's the father?" "Dead." The word was final, absolute. He was a Navajo scout working for the army during the territory disputes. Got killed protecting a settler convoy from raiders 4 years back. She finally turned to look at Garrick. "Caleb's half native. You understand what that means in a place like Copper Hollow?" Garrick understood. Understood the hatred, the laws designed to separate and destroy, the bounties some men still collected for children with the wrong bloodline. He'd seen it before. The casual cruelty people inflicted on those deemed less than human by accident of birth. "That's why you ended up in the workhouse?" he asked quietly. "Partly. Had a job at a boarding house in Copper Hollow for a while, managed to hide Caleb with Marcus most of the time. But there was a fire last winter. Boarding house burned down. Lost everything except what I was wearing." She swallowed hard. "Couldn't find work after that. No references. No money. Eventually ended up at the workhouse, or starve. Marcus said he'd keep Caleb safe until I could get back on my feet, but then the auction happened." Yeah, the weight of it settled between them. Garrick understood now why Eliza had been so wary, so suspicious, so ready for betrayal. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting a child that the world wanted to erase. "Under your bed," Garrick said quietly. "The bundle you keep hidden. That is clothes, Eliza's eyes widened slightly. You knew? Heard you checking on it every night. Figured it was something important you didn't want stolen. He paused. Makes sense now. She looked away, jaw working. I know this changes things. I know you didn't sign up for... Doesn't change anything, Garrick interrupted. You want your boy back, we'll get him back. You want him here, he's welcome here. You want to go somewhere else entirely, I'll help you get there. He met her eyes steadily. That's your child. Your blood. Nothing more important than that. Eliza stared at him like he'd just spoken a language she didn't know existed. You'd just let him come here? A half-native child? Knowing what that could bring down on this place? Let me ask you something, Garrick said. This Marcus Finch, he a permanent solution? No, he travels for trade, can't keep children long term. He's already kept Caleb longer than usual as a favor to me. Then your boy needs somewhere permanent, somewhere safe. Garrick gestured at the cabin, the forest, the mountains rising around them. This is about as far from people as you can get without falling off the world. Anyone wants to come up here and cause trouble about a child, they're welcome to try. Won't enjoy what happens after. Something broke in Eliza's expression then. Some final wall she'd been holding up against the possibility of hope. Her eyes welled with tears. She immediately tried to blink away, her breath catching. I haven't seen him in 8 months, she said, voice cracking. 8 months? And I don't even know if he remembers me. He remembers you, Garrick said with certainty. Children don't forget their mothers, not ever. Eliza put her face in her hands and cried then, great heaving sobs that sounded like they'd been trapped inside her for years. Garrick sat quiet, letting her grieve and release and finally breathe until the crying eventually subsided into shaky breaths. We'll go to Marcus Finch tomorrow, Garrick said. Find out where your boy is and bring him home. Eliza wiped her eyes with her sleeve, nodded, and whispered, Thank you. But even as relief washed over her face, Garrick felt a cold prickle of warning at the base of his skull. The same instinct that had kept him alive through blizzards and bear attacks and 100 other mountain dangers. Bringing Caleb to Raven Ridge was the right thing to do. It was also going to attract exactly the kind of attention neither of them could afford. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, for the first time in months, Eliza Boone slept without barricading her door, and when morning came, they would go get her child back. Whatever came after that, they'd face together. They left before sunrise, the wagon loaded with supplies and pulled by Garrick's 2 strongest horses. The mountain air was cold enough to see breath, and frost clung to the grass in the meadow like scattered diamonds. Eliza sat beside Garrick on the bench this time instead of in the back, wrapped in a wool coat he'd given her that smelled like pine smoke and old leather. She hadn't slept. Garrick could tell by the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands kept fidgeting with the coat's buttons, fastening and unfastening them in an anxious rhythm she probably didn't realize she was doing. Marcus moves around a lot, she said as they descended the switchback trail. Trades between settlements. Last I heard he was working the route between Copper Hollow and Fort Resolute, but that was months ago. We'll find him, Garrick said. Territory only has so many traders willing to haul goods through rough country. Someone will know where he is. The descent took 3 hours, the wagon swaying and creaking on the narrow path, while morning slowly burned the mist out of the valley. By the time they reached level ground, the sun was high enough to turn the dust golden and warm, the air into something almost pleasant. Garrick guided the horses toward the eastern trail that led away from Copper Hollow, following the route supply wagons used to reach the smaller settlements scattered across the territory. Eliza kept watching the road behind them like she expected pursuit, her body tense as a drawn bowstring. Nobody from town knows about Caleb? Garrick asked. Just the matron at the workhouse, Mrs. Calhoun. Eliza's voice went hard on the name. She knew, but she didn't care. Said unwed mothers got what they deserved and half-breed bastards were the territory's problem, not hers. Garrick's hands tightened on the reins, but he kept his voice level. She tell anyone else? Don't think so. Wasn't worth the gossip to her. Eliza turned back to face forward. Most people who saw me with Caleb before just assumed I was watching someone else's kid for money. A big ugly woman makes a good nursemaid, apparently. You're not ugly. The words came out before Garrick thought about them, automatic and honest. Eliza turned to stare at him like he'd grown a second head. I've seen mirrors, she said flatly. Mirrors show what you look like. Don't show who you are. That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to be true. Garrick kept his eyes on the road. You're strong, capable, survived things that would have broken most people. That counts for more than whether your face fits some fool idea of pretty. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. Sam Cord teach you that too? Sam taught me that worth isn't measured by what people see when they look at you. It's measured by what you do when nobody's looking. He paused. Also taught me that the prettiest things in nature are usually poisonous, so maybe conventional beauty's overrated anyway. That actually got a small laugh out of her, quick and surprised, like she'd forgotten how laughter felt. They traveled in companionable silence after that, following the trail as it wound through high desert scrubland dotted with juniper and sage. Around midday, they passed a small ranch where a woman was hanging laundry on a line strung between two posts. She waved cautiously, and Garrick waved back. She know you? Eliza asked. Bought eggs from her once or twice when I needed supplies and didn't want to go all the way to Copper Hollow. Name's Ruth Callahan. Widow. Runs the place alone with her 2 boys. She's scared of you? Most people are. I was too, first few days. What changed? Eliza considered the question carefully. You didn't take anything that wasn't freely given, didn't demand gratitude or obedience or anything else, just existed. Let me exist too. She pulled the coat tighter. That was new. By late afternoon, they reached Willow Creek, a settlement too small to be called a town, but large enough to have a general store, a blacksmith, and a way station where freight wagons stopped to change horses and drivers grabbed hot meals. Garrick pulled the wagon up to the hitching post outside the store and climbed down. Stay here, he said to Eliza. Less questions if it's just me asking. She nodded, pulling the coat's hood up to shadow her face. The store was dim and crowded, shelves packed with everything from canned goods to horse tack. An old man with a walrus mustache stood behind the counter, reading a newspaper with reading glasses perched on his nose. Help you? He asked without looking up. Looking for a trader named Marcus Finch, Garrick said. Heard he works this route. You know where I can find him? The old man lowered his newspaper and studied Garrick with the kind of thorough assessment people usually reserved for livestock purchases. That depends. You law? No. Bounty hunter? No. Owe him money? No. Got business with him, personal business. The old man grunted. Marcus came through here 3 days ago, headed north toward Fort Resolute with a load of salt pork and cornmeal. Usually takes him 4 days to make the circuit, so if you want to catch him, you'd best get moving. He paused. That your wagon outside? It is. Woman in it yours? Garrick felt his jaw tighten. She's her own person, but yes, she's with me. Might want to keep her hidden if you're headed to Fort Resolute. Place has been crawling with railroad men and speculators the past month. They see a woman traveling alone with a mountain man, they'll assume things, make trouble. Let them assume, Garrick said. Trouble comes, I'll handle it. The old man smiled faintly. I bet you will. He pulled out a piece of paper and sketched a rough map. Follow the North Trail. Fort Resolute's about 20 miles from here. If Marcus is keeping to schedule, you'll probably cross paths around Blackwater Spring. Most traders stop there to water their animals. Garrick took the map, nodded his thanks, and bought some jerky and hardtack for the road. When he came back outside, Eliza had climbed down from the wagon and was standing near the horses, feeding them handfuls of grass she'd pulled from beside the hitching post. We're close, Garrick said. Trader came through here a few days ago, heading north. Something flickered across Eliza's face, hope mixed with fear in equal measure. How far? 4 or 5 hours if we push. Might catch him at Blackwater Spring. They remounted the wagon and continued north as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon. The landscape changed gradually, scrubland giving way to rocky outcroppings and scattered pine groves. The trail climbed into foothills that promised mountains beyond, and the air grew cooler with every mile. Eliza's anxiety increased proportionally. She kept shifting on the bench, her hands opening and closing, her breathing shallow and quick. What if he doesn't remember me? She said suddenly. What if I'm just a stranger to him now? You're his mother. That's not something children forget. He was 4 when I left. Barely more than a baby. Old enough to remember, Garrick said firmly. Trust that. They crested a ridge just as the sun touched the horizon, and below them spread a small valley with a natural spring feeding a clear pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. 2 wagons were parked beside the water, and Garrick could see figures moving around a campfire. Eliza stood up in the moving wagon, nearly losing her balance before Garrick caught her arm. Her eyes were locked on the camp below, searching desperately for something specific. Easy, Garrick said. Don't break your neck after coming this far. He guided the wagon down the slope carefully, rocks crunching under the wheels. As they approached the camp, one of the figures straightened and turned toward them. A lean man in his 50s with graying hair tied back in a ponytail and skin weathered dark from years under the sun. Marcus Finch! The trader's eyes widened as he recognized Eliza. Then a broad smile split his face. Eliza Boone, he called out. I'll be damned! Eliza was off the wagon before it fully stopped, stumbling slightly in her haste. Marcus, where is he? He's here, Marcus said quickly. He's safe. He turned toward the second wagon and called out. Caleb, come here, boy. Someone's here to see you. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a small figure emerged from behind the wagon, a boy with dark hair and copper-brown skin wearing clothes that were clean but patched in multiple places. He was thin, all knees and elbows, with eyes that held too much wariness for someone so young. He looked at Eliza. She looked at him. Neither moved. The moment stretched out painfully, and Garrick could see Eliza's worst fear playing out in real time. That her son had forgotten her, that 8 months had been too long, that she was nothing but a stranger now. Then Caleb whispered, Mama? The word broke something open. Eliza dropped to her knees in the dirt, arms outstretched, and Caleb ran to her like his life depended on it. He hit her with enough force to nearly knock her over, his small arms wrapping around her neck, his face buried in her shoulder. Eliza held him like she'd never let go, one hand cradling his head, the other pressed against his back, her whole body shaking with sobs she couldn't control. Caleb was crying too, the kind of desperate tears that came from fear and relief all mixed together. Mama, he kept saying. Mama, Mama, Mama. I'm here, Eliza managed between sobs. I'm here, baby. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Garrick stayed by the wagon, giving them space, but he felt something tight in his chest watching the reunion. Marcus Finch stepped beside him, arms crossed, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Thought I'd never see that happen, Marcus said quietly. Boy asked about her every single day. Every morning, first thing, is Mama coming today? Broke my heart every time I had to say, not yet. She's been trying to get back to him, Garrick said. World just kept getting in the way. Marcus turned to study Garrick properly for the first time. You're the mountain man everyone's talking about. Bought her at auction. Bought her contract, not her. Distinction matter to you? It does. Marcus nodded slowly. Good. He paused. You know what that boy is? What his blood means? I know. You know what kind of trouble that could bring? I know that too. And you're taking them both anyway? Garrick met Marcus's eyes steadily. I am. The trader studied him for a long moment, then stuck out his hand. Then you're a better man than most. Name's Marcus Finch. Garrick Hale. They shook, and Marcus gestured toward the fire. You folks eatin'? Got rabbit stew and cornbread. Ain't fancy, but it's hot. Appreciate it. Eliza finally stood, though she kept Caleb pressed against her side like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. The boy was talking in a rapid whisper, telling her everything that had happened in 8 months, the places Marcus had taken him, the things he'd seen, how he'd learned to help water the horses and sort supplies. She listened to every word like it was scripture, her hand constantly touching his hair, his face, his shoulders, reassuring herself he was real. They gathered around the fire as full dark settled over the valley. Marcus's hired hand, a young man named Thomas who barely looked old enough to shave, served up stew in tin bowls and passed around cornbread wrapped in cloth. Caleb sat pressed against Eliza's side, eating slowly, his eyes constantly flicking to her face like he needed to confirm she was still there. She kept her arm around him, holding him close, occasionally pressing her face against his hair and breathing deep like she was memorizing his scent. How long you been hauling children along with cargo? Garrick asked Marcus. Started about 10 years back, the trader replied. Found a baby abandoned at a way station in winter. Nobody claimed her, territory officials didn't want to be bothered with it, so I took her along until I could find someone willing to raise her properly. He poked at the fire with a stick. Word got around. Now, people bring me children who need temporary homes. Orphans, bastards, kids with the wrong bloodline. I keep them safe until permanent solutions present themselves. That happen often? Permanent solutions? Sometimes. Marcus didn't sound optimistic. Sometimes I end up hauling the same child for years because nobody wants them. Sometimes they just disappear into the system and I never know what happened to them. Caleb was supposed to be temporary, Eliza said quietly. When I went to the workhouse, Marcus promised he'd keep him safe until I could work off my term and come back. How long was your term? Garrick asked. 3 years? Marcus shook his head. Boy would have been 8 by then. Too old for most people looking to adopt. Too young to work for himself. And with his heritage, he didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. He's not going back, Eliza said, her voice hard and certain. Never again. I don't care what I have to do. You don't have to do anything except raise him, Garrick said. Boy's got a home now, up on Raven Ridge with us. Caleb looked up at Garrick for the first time properly, his eyes wide and cautious. Are you my papa now? The question landed like a physical blow. Garrick saw Eliza freeze, saw Marcus wince, saw Thomas suddenly find his stew very interesting. No, Garrick said gently. Your papa was a brave man who died protecting people. I can't replace him and wouldn't try. He paused, choosing words carefully. But I'm a friend to your mama, and that makes me a friend to you. And friends take care of each other. That work for you? Caleb considered this seriously, then nodded. Okay. The tension broke. Eliza let out a breath she'd been holding, and Marcus chuckled softly. They finished eating as stars emerged overhead, bright and countless in the clear mountain air. Caleb started yawning despite obvious efforts to stay awake, his head drooping against Eliza's shoulder. There's bedrolls in the wagon, Garrick said. You two should sleep. We'll head back to Raven Ridge at first light. Eliza nodded, stood carefully with Caleb in her arms, and carried him to the wagon. Garrick watched her settle the boy in the wagon bed, covering him with blankets and lying down beside him, her arm draped protectively across his small body. Marcus moved to sit beside Garrick, both men staring into the fire. You got any idea what you're walking into? Marcus asked quietly. Trouble. More specific than that. There's been talk in the settlements. Railroad agent named Victor Grange has been buying up land around Copper Hollow, trying to force a route through tribal territories for his rail line. Problem is, there's old treaties in place that give certain families rights to that land. Families with native blood. Garrick felt cold understanding settle in his gut. Caleb's father was one of those families. The boy has inheritance rights to a significant parcel of land right where Grange wants to lay track. Marcus poked at the fire again. Grange has been trying to invalidate those treaties, claiming the families are extinct or the children don't exist. If he finds out there's a living heir, he'll try to eliminate the problem. One way or another. Marcus looked at Garrick seriously. You take that boy to your mountain, you paint a target on all 3 of you. Grange has money, connections, and no morals. He'll use the law if he can, hired guns if he can't. Let him try. You really think you can protect them alone up there? Garrick met Marcus's eyes. I've survived worse than greedy railroad agents. Maybe. But Eliza and Caleb haven't. Marcus stood, dusting off his pants. Just be careful. World's got a way of punishing people who try to do right more than it punishes those who do wrong. They settled in for the night, Garrick taking first watch while the others slept. He sat with his back against a wagon wheel, rifle across his lap, watching the darkness and thinking about what Marcus had said. He'd known taking in Eliza would complicate his life. Known it the moment he threw that silver dollar on the auction platform. But knowing something intellectually and feeling the full weight of it were 2 different things. Now there was a child involved. A child with a target on his back because of blood he didn't choose and land rights he didn't understand. A child who'd already lost his father and nearly lost his mother and deserved better than a world that wanted him erased for the crime of existing. Garrick thought about Sam Cord, about the promise he'd made to help people when he could. Sam would have done the same thing without hesitation. Hell, Sam probably would have gone down to Copper Hollow and beaten Victor Grange senseless with his bare hands just on principle. The thought made Garrick smile faintly in the darkness. He'd protect them. Eliza and Caleb both. Whatever it took, however long it took, he'd make sure they had the chance to build a life without fear, even if it meant going to war with the entire valley to do it. Morning came cold and clear. Eliza woke before dawn, still curled around Caleb, and Garrick saw her just watching the boy sleep, memorizing his face, counting his breaths, convincing herself this was real. They broke camp quickly, sharing coffee and leftover cornbread before loading the wagon. Caleb was shy at first, staying close to Eliza, but gradually his curiosity won out. He examined the wagon, petted the horses, asked Garrick 100 questions about the mountains and what kind of animals lived there. Bears? Caleb asked, eyes wide. Some. Mostly they keep to themselves if you don't bother them. Wolves? Few. More coyotes than wolves this far south. Dragons? Garrick raised an eyebrow. Where'd you hear about dragons? Marcus told me stories. Said there might be dragons in the high peaks where nobody goes. Marcus tells tall tales, Garrick said, but not unkindly. No dragons. But there's eagles big enough to carry off a lamb, and elk with antlers wide as wagon wheels, and mountain lions that can climb trees faster than you can run. That interesting enough? Caleb nodded enthusiastically. They said goodbye to Marcus and Thomas as the sun broke over the eastern ridge. Marcus pulled Eliza aside for a private word, and Garrick saw him press something into her hand. Money, probably, or letters, or both. She hugged the old trader fiercely. Whispering thanks, he waved away with gruff embarrassment. The journey back to Raven Ridge felt different. Lighter somehow, despite the weight of what Garrick knew was coming. Caleb sat between them on the bench, talking constantly, pointing at birds and rocks and clouds, asking questions about everything he saw. Eliza answered patiently, her voice warm in a way Garrick had never heard before. Motherhood fit her, he realized, gave her purpose beyond survival, softened the hard edges fear and suffering had carved into her. They stopped around midday to water the horses and eat. Caleb discovered a patch of wild strawberries and spent 20 minutes gathering them in his shirt, bringing them back to Eliza like precious treasure. These are perfect, she told him seriously. Best strawberries I ever saw. Caleb beamed with pride. Watching them together, Garrick felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not quite longing, not quite sadness, but something adjacent to both. He'd spent so many years alone that he'd forgotten what family looked like, what it felt like to be responsible for someone beyond yourself. It was terrifying. It was also maybe the most important thing he'd ever done. They reached Raven Ridge as afternoon shadows grew long across the clearing. Caleb went silent as the cabin came into view, his small hand reaching for Eliza's. That's home now, she told him gently. Our home. It's so big, Caleb whispered. Garrick almost laughed. The cabin was tiny by most standards, barely large enough for 2 people, let alone 3. But to a child who'd spent his life in wagons and temporary shelters, it probably looked like a mansion. Eliza carried Caleb inside while Garrick tended the horses. By the time he joined them, she'd given the boy a tour of the entire cabin, all 2 rooms of it, and was showing him the spare room that would be his. I can sleep here? Caleb asked. By myself? All yours, Eliza confirmed. We'll get you a proper bed built. For now, there's blankets and a good mattress. Caleb touched the wall like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Then he turned to Eliza with tears in his eyes. I thought you weren't coming back, he whispered. I thought you forgot about me. Eliza knelt down and took his face in her hands. Never, not for 1 second. Every single day I was gone, I was trying to get back to you. And now I'm here, and I'm never leaving again. Understand? Caleb nodded, and she pulled him into a hug that lasted long enough for Garrick to quietly excuse himself and give them privacy. He went outside to split firewood, giving them time to settle in, to process, to begin healing from 8 months of separation. The sun sank lower, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple, and Garrick found himself thinking about what came next. Tomorrow he'd ride into Copper Hollow, make it clear that Caleb was under his protection now, that anyone who had problems with the boy's existence could take it up with him directly. It was risky, might paint an even bigger target on them all, but hiding wouldn't work. Eventually someone would find out. Better to control the narrative before rumors did it for him. Marcus had mentioned Victor Grange specifically, and that name stuck in Garrick's mind like a burr. Railroad agents were dangerous because they had resources and legal cover for their cruelty, but they also had weaknesses: pride, greed, the assumption that money could solve any problem. Garrick would find those weaknesses, exploit them if necessary. He was still splitting wood when Eliza emerged from the cabin, closing the door quietly behind her. She walked over and picked up the pieces he'd split, stacking them neatly beside the door. "He's asleep," she said. "Fell asleep mid-sentence telling me about a dog Marcus met at one of the settlements." "Good. Kid needs rest." "Garrick." Eliza stopped stacking wood and turned to face him. "I don't know how to thank you for this, for everything. I don't have money, don't have skills beyond basic labor, can't offer you anything except—" "Stop." Garrick set down the axe. "You don't owe me gratitude or payment or anything else. I did what needed doing. That's the end of it." "That can't be the end of it. You took in 2 people who are going to bring nothing but trouble to your door. You have to let me—" "What I have to let you do is build a life for yourself and your boy without feeling like you're indebted for basic human decency." His voice came out harsher than intended. He softened it. "I'm not keeping a ledger, Eliza. I'm not waiting for you to work off some invisible debt. You're here because you deserve to be here. Caleb's here because he deserves his mother. That's the whole equation." Eliza stared at him, her eyes searching his face for the angle, the hidden cost, the eventual betrayal. She wouldn't find it because it didn't exist, but Garrick understood why she had to look anyway. "The world doesn't work like that," she said finally. "Maybe it should, but it doesn't, which means eventually there's going to be consequences for this. For hiding a half-native child on your land, for sheltering someone like me." Her voice dropped. "I need you to understand that when those consequences come, I won't blame you for sending us away, for protecting yourself. That's not going to happen. You can't know that. I can." Garrick picked up the axe again, positioned another log. "Tomorrow, I'm riding into Copper Hollow. I'm going to make it very clear that Caleb is under my protection, that anyone who has issues with it can address them directly to me." He split the log with one clean stroke. "After that, the whole valley will know, and they can accept it, or they can try to do something about it. Either way, you and the boys stay here." Eliza's hands clenched into fists. "That's suicide. You're painting a target on yourself for no reason." "There's a reason. His name's Caleb, and he deserves to grow up without hiding who he is. He's 5 years old. He doesn't need to be a symbol or a statement. He needs to be safe. He can be both." Garrick set down the axe and faced her fully. "Listen to me. I spent 5 years in these mountains learning that hiding doesn't equal safety. It just equals loneliness and fear and waiting for the axe to fall. Your boy deserves better than that. So do you." "My boy deserves to live," Eliza shot back, "even if that means living scared." "Is that the life you want for him? Looking over his shoulder forever? Never trusting anyone? Never believing he has a right to exist?" "It's better than him dead." The words hung in the air between them, raw and desperate. Eliza's breathing was ragged, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Garrick spoke quietly. "I'm not letting anyone hurt that child, but I'm also not teaching him that his existence is something to apologize for. There's a middle path here, and we're going to find it. And if we can't, then I'll deal with whatever comes. But we try it my way first." Eliza looked at him for a long moment, jaw working, clearly wanting to argue but unable to find the words. Finally, she just shook her head and went back to stacking wood. They worked in silence as the last light faded from the sky. When the woodpile was done, Garrick built a fire in the cabin while Eliza checked on Caleb one more time. The boy was still asleep, curled under blankets in his new room, one hand tucked under his cheek. They sat by the fire with coffee, the familiar evening ritual now shared with the knowledge that tomorrow everything might change. "Marcus told me about Victor Grange," Eliza said suddenly. "About the land rights. About why he might come after Caleb." "Figured he might." "You already knew?" "Suspected. Railroad agents don't buy up territory without reason, and they don't like complications in the form of legal heirs with legitimate claims." Eliza stared into her coffee. "Caleb's father made me memorize everything before he died. The treaty numbers, the land parcels, the family names. Said if anything happened to him, I needed to be able to prove Caleb's inheritance." She looked up. "I never thought it would matter. Thought the territory would just take what it wanted regardless of legal rights. Probably will, Garrick said honestly. But that doesn't mean we make it easy for them. What are you planning to do? Go to Copper Hollow and challenge Victor Grange to a duel? Something like that. That's not a plan. That's suicide with extra steps. Maybe. Garrick set down his coffee. But it's also making a statement that we're not hiding, that we're not ashamed, that if they want trouble, they'll get it. And if Grange sends hired guns, if the territorial governor gets involved, if they decide to just burn this place to the ground, then we'll cross that bridge when we reach it. Eliza laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're insane, you know that? Been called worse. She shook her head, but some of the tension had left her shoulders. When are you leaving? Dawn. I'm coming with you. No. Yes. If you're going to paint a target on us, I should be there. They should see me standing with you. Someone needs to stay with Caleb. Then we both stay. Or we all go. But I'm not letting you fight this alone. Garrick studied her face in the firelight. The determination there, the fear she was pushing down, the strength that had carried her through worse than this. All right, he said finally. We'll all go. Show Copper Hollow that Caleb's not a secret or a shame. He's just a boy with a family who loves him. Eliza nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then we'd better get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hell. She was right about that. Neither of them knew just how right. They rode into Copper Hollow just past noon, when the sun was high enough to make men squint and tempers run short. Garrick drove the wagon with Eliza beside him, and Caleb seated between them, the boy's small hand gripping his mother's sleeve. The main street was busy with the usual midday traffic. Miners heading to the assay office, ranchers buying supplies, women with shopping baskets moving between stores. The conversations died one by one as people noticed the wagon. First just curious glances, then longer stares, then outright gawking as recognition set in. The mountain man who'd bought the ugly girl at auction was back, and he'd brought her with him, and between them sat a child who clearly wasn't white. Garrick felt Eliza stiffen beside him, but she kept her chin up, her eyes forward. Caleb pressed closer to her side, sensing the hostility in the air even if he didn't understand its source. Steady, Garrick murmured. We're just passing through, making a point, not picking a fight. Tell them that, Eliza muttered, as a woman across the street pulled her children away from the boardwalk like Caleb's mere presence might contaminate them. Garrick guided the wagon toward the sheriff's office, a squat building at the end of the street with barred windows and a sagging porch. Sheriff Barrett stood outside, arms crossed, watching their approach with an expression Garrick couldn't quite read. The wagon stopped. Garrick climbed down, then helped Eliza and Caleb down after him. The boy immediately hid behind his mother's skirts, peering out at the crowd that had begun to gather. Sheriff, Garrick said. Hail. Barrett's eyes flicked to Eliza, then down to Caleb, and something shifted in his expression. Heard you'd taken up family life. News travels fast. Always does in small towns. Barrett uncrossed his arms. That the Boone woman's boy? His name's Caleb, Eliza said sharply. And yes, he's mine. A murmur ran through the growing crowd. Garrick could hear the whispers starting, could feel the tension building like pressure before a thunderstorm. Thought you didn't have any children, Barrett said to Eliza. Workhouse records didn't mention it. Workhouse records don't mention a lot of things, Eliza replied. Doesn't make them less true. Barrett looked uncomfortable, like he was doing math in his head and not liking the sum he was getting. Boy's father? Dead. Died 4 years back protecting a settler convoy during the Navajo conflicts. Eliza's voice was steady, but her hand on Caleb's shoulder tightened. He was a scout, a good man, and his son has every right to exist without being interrogated about it. Nobody's interrogating, Barrett said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Just trying to understand the situation. The situation, Garrick cut in, is simple. Caleb is Eliza's son. They're both living on Raven Ridge under my protection. Anyone has problems with that? They can address them to me directly. The crowd had grown to maybe 40 people now, forming a loose semicircle around the wagon. Garrick recognized some faces from the auction, the mine foreman who'd bought the first girl, Mrs. Calhoun, from the workhouse, several ranchers and their wives, and standing near the back, watching with cold calculation, was Victor Grange. The railroad agent stepped forward, his silk vest catching the sunlight. Interesting declaration, Mr. Hale. Though I'm curious about the legal basis for your claim to custody. The child appears to be of mixed heritage, which brings certain territorial regulations into play. What regulations? Eliza demanded. The Indian Removal Act has provisions regarding children of mixed parentage, Grange said smoothly, particularly when land rights or tribal treaties are involved. Such children often require territorial oversight to ensure proper placement and education. Proper placement, Eliza repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. You mean stolen from their families and shipped to boarding schools that beat the native out of them? I mean legally mandated care in accordance with territorial law. Grange's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, if you can provide documentation proving the child's parentage and your legal guardianship, that would simplify matters considerably. Garrick saw the trap immediately. Documentation meant records. Records meant revealing Caleb's father's identity, which meant revealing the land rights Marcus had mentioned, which meant giving Grange exactly the information he needed to either invalidate the claims or eliminate the claimant. Don't need documentation to raise my own son, Eliza said. Actually, in cases involving potential tribal affiliation, you do. Grange pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. I took the liberty of consulting with Territorial Judge Morrison. He agrees that absent proper documentation, the child should be remanded to territorial custody pending investigation of his status and legal claims. Barrett's hand moved to his gun belt, not drawing, just resting there. That true, Grange? You got court orders? I have a judicial opinion, Grange said, which given the circumstances should be sufficient to detain the child until proper hearings can be arranged. Like hell, Eliza spat. Garrick put a hand on her arm, gentle but firm. Easy. He turned to Barrett. You planning to enforce this judicial opinion, Sheriff? Barrett looked deeply uncomfortable. I'd need to see actual court orders before I detain anyone. Opinion's not the same as orders. Then I suggest Mr. Grange get actual orders before making threats, Garrick said. Until then, Caleb stays with his mother. This isn't a threat, Mr. Hale. It's a courtesy warning. Grange's voice hardened. That child represents a legal complication to significant business interests in this territory. It would be in everyone's best interest if he were placed in proper institutional care until his status can be resolved. Institutional care, Garrick repeated. That what you call orphanages that work children to death? I call it following the law. Then the law is wrong. The crowd murmured at that, some in agreement, most in shock. You didn't question the law in Copper Hollow, not openly, not in front of the sheriff. Grange's smile widened. Careful, Mr. Hale. Statements like that could be construed as seditious. Construe however you like. Garrick took a step forward. Grange took a step back. But understand this. Anyone tries to take that boy from his mother, they'll answer to me. Court orders, territorial law, business interests. I don't care. He stays with Eliza. End of discussion. You can't fight the entire territorial government, Grange said. Watch me. The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice. He won't be fighting alone. Everyone turned. Doc Hendricks stepped out from the crowd, his medical bag in hand. I remember the convoy attack Eliza mentioned. 4 years back, late summer. I treated survivors. The Navajo scout who died saved at least a dozen lives, including 2 children and a pregnant woman. He looked at Grange. If this boy is his son, then he's the child of a hero. And heroes' children deserve better than being used as pawns in railroad schemes. This isn't your concern, Doctor, Grange said coldly. Child welfare is exactly my concern, medical and otherwise. Hendricks crossed his arms. I'll testify to the father's service if it comes to hearings, free of charge. Another voice spoke up. Ruth Callahan, the widow rancher, pushed through the crowd. I'll testify too. My husband died in that same attack. The scout Eliza's talking about, I saw him pull my husband to safety before he got shot himself. Didn't even know the man, and he still tried to save him. More murmurs, these ones less hostile. Garrick saw the momentum shifting, saw doubt creeping into faces that had been certain moments before. Grange saw it too. His expression hardened. This is very touching, but irrelevant. The law is the law, and territorial regulations regarding mixed heritage children are clear. Sheriff Barrett, I expect you to do your duty. Barrett looked from Grange to Garrick to Caleb, who was still hiding behind Eliza's skirts, his small face pale with fear. The sheriff's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "I'll need to see those court orders," Barrett said finally. "Real orders, signed by a judge, not just an opinion letter. Until then, the boy stays with his mother." Grange's face flushed with anger. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Barrett turned to Garrick. "You folks should head back to your mountain. Town's not safe for you right now." "Because of legal proceedings, or because of something else?" Garrick asked. Barrett didn't answer directly. "Just get out of here, before this gets worse." Garrick nodded once, helped Eliza and Caleb back into the wagon, and climbed up to the driver's bench. As he turned the horses, he caught Grange's eye one more time. The railroad agent wasn't trying to hide his fury anymore. "This isn't over," Grange said quietly. "No," Garrick agreed. "It's not." They rode out of Copper Hollow under the weight of dozens of stares, some sympathetic, most hostile, all calculating what this confrontation meant for them personally. The town was choosing sides, whether they wanted to or not. Eliza didn't speak until they'd cleared the town limits and started up the mountain trail. Then she turned to Garrick, her face tight with anger and fear. "That was stupid. You just made us a target." "We were already a target. I just made it clear we're not hiding." "Same thing," Eliza's voice cracked. "You heard Grange. He's going to come after Caleb with court orders and legal proceedings, and we'll fight them. With testimony from Doc Hendricks and Ruth Callahan and anyone else who remembers what Caleb's father did." "That won't be enough. You know it won't be enough." Caleb was crying silently, tears running down his face as he pressed against Eliza's side. She wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why do they hate me?" Caleb whispered. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You didn't, baby. You didn't do anything wrong." Eliza kissed the top of his head. "Some people are just hateful. It's not about you." But it was about him, Garrick thought, about what he represented, what his existence meant for land rights and railroad profits, and the convenient fiction that the territory could take whatever it wanted without consequence. They made it back to Raven Ridge by late afternoon. Garrick unhitched the horses while Eliza took Caleb inside, and he could hear her voice through the cabin walls, soft and reassuring, trying to convince her son that everything would be all right. Garrick wasn't sure he believed it himself. He was feeding the horses when he heard riders approaching from down the mountain. 3 of them, moving fast. Garrick grabbed his rifle from the barn and stepped into the yard, positioning himself between the cabin and the trail. The riders came into view, Barrett flanked by 2 deputies Garrick recognized from town. The sheriff raised one hand in a gesture of peace, but his other hand stayed near his gun. "Came alone," Barrett called out. "Just need to talk." "Then talk from there," Garrick replied, not lowering the rifle. Barrett dismounted slowly, his deputies staying on their horses. He walked forward until he was maybe 20 feet from Garrick, then stopped. "Grange left town right after you did, headed to the territorial capital to get those court orders he was talking about." Barrett's voice was tired. "He's got friends in high places. Judge Morrison will sign whatever Grange wants. Could be back here in 3 days with legal authority to seize the boy." "Let him try." "Garrick, listen to me. I've known you for years. You're not a bad man. But this fight you're picking, you can't win it. Not against the territorial government and railroad money combined. What would you suggest? That I hand over a 5-year-old child to people who'll either kill him or ship him off to some hellhole boarding school? I'm suggesting you think about the bigger picture. Grange wants the land rights neutralized. That's all he cares about." Barrett took a step closer. If Eliza signed over Caleb's inheritance claims, renounced any rights to the land, Grange would lose interest. Boy could grow up in peace. In peace without his birthright, without any claim to his father's legacy. Better alive and poor than dead and entitled. Garrick lowered the rifle slightly. "That really what you came up here to tell me? To surrender?" "I came to tell you what's coming, and to ask if you've got a plan beyond stubborn defiance." "I've got a plan." "Which is?" "Making sure anyone who wants that boy has to go through me first, and making that prospect unpleasant enough that they reconsider." Barrett shook his head. "That's not a plan. That's suicide. Third person to tell me that in 2 days, starting to wonder if y'all are right." "We are right, and you know it." Barrett gestured back toward the trail. "Grange has money for hired guns, has connections with territorial marshals, Has legal authority to call in military support if he frames this as an Indian uprising or threat to public safety. He paused. You're one man with a rifle on a remote mountain. How long you think you'll last? Long enough? For what? For people to see what this really is. Not a legal proceeding or a land dispute, just greed dressed up in fancy words, trying to erase a child because his existence is inconvenient. Barrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said quietly, You're not wrong about what this is, but being right doesn't stop bullets or court orders. Maybe not, but it's better than being wrong and alive. The sheriff sighed, looked back at his deputies, then back at Garrick. There's one other thing. Mrs. Calhoun from the workhouse. She's been talking, telling anyone who will listen that Eliza was pregnant when she came to the workhouse, that she hid the child to avoid losing him to territorial custody. He met Garrick's eyes. If that's true, if there's documentation of her concealing Caleb's existence, Grange will use it to claim she's unfit, take custody on grounds of maternal abandonment. Garrick felt cold fury settle in his chest. She was trying to protect him. I know, but the law doesn't always account for good intentions. Barrett turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Ruth Callahan came to see me after you left town, said she and some other women want to help. Don't know what they can do against Grange's legal machinery, but they're willing to try. He climbed back on his horse. You're not as alone as you think, but you're still outnumbered and outgunned. Keep that in mind. The sheriff and his deputies rode back down the mountain, leaving Garrick standing in the yard with his rifle and his thoughts. He went inside to find Eliza and Caleb at the table. She'd made soup somehow, was feeding the boy with mechanical efficiency while staring at nothing. Caleb ate obediently, but without appetite, his eyes red from crying. Barrett came to warn us, Garrick said. Grange is getting court orders. Could be back in 3 days. Eliza nodded like she'd expected this. What do we do? Fight. How? With what? You heard Barrett. Grange has money, guns, legal authority. We have nothing. We have the truth. The truth doesn't mean anything against that kind of power. Garrick sat down across from her. Maybe not, but we also have people, Doc Hendricks, Ruth Callahan, others who remember what Caleb's father did. People who might be willing to stand against Grange if they see someone else standing first. That's not a plan. That's hope. And hope doesn't stop hired guns or court orders. No, but it's a start. Garrick looked at Caleb. What's your father's full name? The question surprised Eliza. Why? Because if we're fighting for his inheritance rights, I need to know who he was. Need to find proof of his service, his land claims, everything that makes those rights legitimate. Eliza hesitated, then spoke quietly. His name was Daniel Tazosi. His grandfather signed the treaty that granted his family land rights in 1854. Daniel inherited those rights when his father died. He was going to claim the land after his military service ended, build a ranch there. Her voice cracked. He died 3 weeks before his discharge. Where's the documentation? Treaty copies, military records, anything proving Caleb's claim? Daniel kept everything in a leather case. After he died, I hid it. Couldn't risk anyone finding it while I was at the workhouse. She looked at Garrick. It's buried near the old mission church, east of Copper Hollow, wrapped in oilcloth, buried 3 feet down under a marked stone. Then that's what I need to get, before Grange can destroy it or claim it doesn't exist. The church is in town. You can't just walk in and start digging. Won't be walking. I'll go tonight, after dark. That's insane. You'll get caught. Maybe. Garrick stood. But if we're fighting this in court, we need documentation. Real proof that Caleb's claim is legitimate. Without it, we're arguing air against legal papers. Eliza stared at him for a long moment. You're really willing to risk everything for a child who isn't yours? For people you barely know? I'm willing to risk everything to keep a child from being destroyed by people who see him as a problem to solve instead of a person to protect. He paused. Besides, you're not people I barely know anymore. You're family, all of you. The word hung in the air. Caleb looked up at Garrick with wide eyes, and Eliza's expression did something complicated. Fear and gratitude and disbelief all fighting for dominance. Family, she repeated softly. If you'll have me. She didn't answer with words, just nodded once, sharp and certain, and that was enough. Garrick prepared through the rest of the day, checking his rifle, sharpening his knife, memorizing the path Eliza described to the mission church. He'd need to move fast and quiet, dig up the case, and get back to Raven Ridge before anyone noticed. Simple in theory, dangerous in practice. As twilight settled over the mountains, Eliza caught him outside the barn. "I should come with you," she said. "I know exactly where it's buried. You'll be searching blind. You need to stay with Caleb. He can come too. We all go. We all stick together." "No," Garrick's voice was firm. "If something goes wrong, if I get caught or killed, you and Caleb need to run. Take the wagon, head to Fort Resolute, find Marcus Finch. He'll help you disappear into the territory where Grange can't find you. I'm not running. You will if I don't come back. That's not negotiable." He met her eyes. "Promise me. If things go bad, you protect Caleb first. Everything else is secondary." Eliza's jaw clenched. "I promise. But you better come back." "I intend to." He left on horseback just after full dark, following the trail down the mountain by moonlight. The ride to Copper Hollow took 3 hours, and Garrick used the time to prepare himself mentally for what came next. Breaking into church property. Grave robbing, essentially, even if the grave only held papers instead of bodies. Theft in the eyes of the law, even if the items rightfully belonged to Caleb. But the law had stopped being a reliable arbiter of right and wrong somewhere around the time it started calling children problems to solve. The mission church sat on the eastern edge of town, a simple adobe structure with a bell tower and a small cemetery surrounded by an iron fence. Garrick left his horse tied in a grove of cottonwoods a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, moving through shadows and keeping low. The town was mostly dark, just a few lit windows in the saloons and homes. Garrick skirted the main street entirely, approaching the church from behind using the cemetery as cover. The marked stone was exactly where Eliza said it would be, a flat river rock painted with a small red cross, wedged between 2 larger headstones near the back fence. Garrick knelt beside it and started digging with his hands, not daring to use a shovel that might clank or scrape. The dirt was hard-packed and stubborn. His fingers scraped against rocks and roots as he dug deeper, trying to stay quiet while working fast. 1 foot down, 2 feet, 3 feet, and nothing yet. Had Eliza misremembered the location? Had someone already found it? Then his fingers hit something that wasn't dirt. Oilcloth, just like she'd said. Garrick pulled it free carefully, unwrapping the bundle to reveal a leather document case inside. He opened it just enough to confirm papers were inside, then rewrapped everything and stood. That's when he heard voices. 2 men walking from the direction of the church proper. Garrick froze behind a tall headstone, barely breathing, as they passed within 10 feet of his position. "Told Grange we'd keep watch on the church in case someone came looking," one voice said. "Didn't think anyone actually would." "Mountain Man's not stupid. He knows those papers are his only shot at fighting the court orders." They were deputies. Barrett's men, probably, though Garrick couldn't see faces in the darkness, just silhouettes and voices. "We should check the cemetery, make sure nobody's disturbed anything." Garrick's hand moved to his knife. He didn't want to hurt these men. They were just doing their jobs, following orders. But he wasn't leaving without the documents. The deputies moved into the cemetery, lantern light swinging across headstones. Garrick waited until they'd passed his position, then moved quickly in the opposite direction, staying low, using graves as cover. He made it to the fence and was halfway over when a voice rang out. "Hey, someone's here!" Garrick dropped to the other side and ran. Behind him he heard shouts, boots pounding dirt, the sound of a gun being drawn. "Stop or I'll shoot!" Garrick didn't stop. He sprinted through the darkness toward the cottonwood grove, the document case clutched against his chest. A gunshot cracked through the night, the bullet whining past his head and striking a tree somewhere ahead. He reached his horse, untied it in 3 seconds flat, and swung into the saddle as another shot rang out. The horse bolted at the sound, galloping away from town before Garrick fully had his seat. More shouts behind him, more gunshots, wild and inaccurate in the darkness. Then he was clear, riding hard up the mountain trail, the documents secured in his coat. He didn't slow down until he was an hour into the climb and certain nobody was following. Then he let the horse catch its breath while his own heart rate gradually returned to normal. He'd done it. Had the proof they needed. Now came the hard part, using it before Grange's court orders arrived and made possession of documents irrelevant. Garrick reached Raven Ridge just before dawn, exhausted but intact. Eliza ran out of the cabin as he dismounted, her face tight with worry. I heard shots, she said. Thought they'd... I'm fine, got the documents. He pulled the leather case from his coat and handed it to her. Everything Daniel saved. It's all there. Eliza took the case with shaking hands, opened it, and started sorting through papers by lamplight. Treaties, land grants, military service records, letters from commanding officers praising Daniel's bravery and skill. Everything needed to prove Caleb's legitimacy and his rights. This is it, she whispered. This is everything. Now we need a lawyer. Someone who can take these documents and build a legal case strong enough to stand against Grange's court orders. Where are we supposed to find a lawyer willing to go against the railroad? Garrick thought about that. Thought about what Barrett had said about people willing to help. Thought about Doc Hendricks and Ruth Callahan, and others who might be persuaded to stand against power if given a reason. Fort Resolute, he said. Territorial capital's there. Must be lawyers who aren't in Grange's pocket. Someone who will take the case. That's 2 days' ride. Grange will be back with court orders before we can even reach the fort. Then we move fast. Leave today. All 3 of us. Eliza looked back at the cabin where Caleb still slept, exhausted from yesterday's trauma. Then she looked at the documents in her hands. Then at Garrick. We run toward the fight instead of away from it, she said. Only way to win is to engage. Can't fight battles from hiding. She nodded slowly. All right, we go to Fort Resolute. Find a lawyer. Make Grange's court orders irrelevant by establishing Caleb's rights before they arrive. Exactly. They spent the morning preparing, packing supplies, loading the wagon, explaining to Caleb in simple terms that they were going on a trip to fix some legal problems. The boy didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway, trusting his mother and the mountain man who'd somehow become family. They were loading the last supplies when riders appeared on the trail. Not deputies this time. Hired guns by the look of them, 3 hard men with weapons displayed openly and faces that promised violence. Garrick stepped in front of the wagon, rifle in hand. Eliza grabbed Caleb and moved him behind the cabin wall. The riders stopped at the edge of the clearing. Their leader, a scarred man with gray stubble and cold eyes, spoke without dismounting. Victor Grange sends his regards. Says you got property doesn't belong to you. Suggests you hand it over peaceful-like. Tell Victor Grange to come get it himself, Garrick replied. He figured you'd say that. The scarred man smiled without humor. Which is why he hired us to be persuasive. You ride back and tell Grange this. He wants these documents. He can face me in court. He wants to come up here with guns. That's his choice. But whoever he sends won't leave this mountain alive. The hired guns exchanged glances. The leader's smile faded. Big words for one man. Try me. For a long moment, nobody moved. Garrick could feel his heart pounding, could see Eliza peering around the cabin corner with Caleb pressed against her side, could smell gun oil and horse sweat and his own fear. Then the hired guns turned their horses and rode back down the trail. Garrick waited until they were out of sight, then lowered the rifle with shaking hands. They'll be back, Eliza said quietly. I know. With more men, better armed. I know. We need to leave, now. Get Caleb, we're going. They abandoned half their supplies, threw the essentials into the wagon, and fled Raven Ridge with the sun barely past noon. Behind them, Garrick's cabin stood quiet and empty, waiting for whatever violence Grange would send next. The race to Fort Resolute had begun, and somewhere behind them, court orders and hired guns were closing in fast. They drove through the night, stopping only to water the horses and let Caleb sleep fitfully in the wagon bed wrapped in blankets. Eliza sat rigid beside Garrick, the leather document case pressed against her chest like armor, her eyes constantly scanning the darkness behind them for signs of pursuit. How far to Fort Resolute? She asked as dawn broke gray and cold over the eastern plains. Another day if we push hard. Maybe less. Garrick's voice was rough from exhaustion and dust. He hadn't slept in over 30 hours. There's a way station at Crossroads Creek. We can rest the horses there, get food. We don't have time to rest. Horses do. They collapse. We're stranded. Eliza knew he was right, but hated it anyway. Every minute they spent not moving was a minute for Grange's hired guns to close the distance, for court orders to be signed and delivered, for the machinery of power to grind them into dust. Caleb woke around mid-morning, disoriented and scared. Where are we? Gonna get help, baby, Eliza said, climbing back to sit with him. Remember, we talked about this. I don't like it. I want to go home. We will, soon as we fix this. Why can't the bad men just leave us alone? Eliza didn't have an answer that would make sense to a 5-year-old. Hell, it barely made sense to her. Land rights and railroad expansion and territorial law, all of it just fancy words for the same old story. People with power taking from people without it and calling it progress. They reached Crossroads Creek just before noon. The way station was a cluster of rough buildings around a well, with a stable, a general store, and a combination saloon and boarding house that looked like it might collapse if someone sneezed too hard. Garrick pulled the wagon to the stable and paid a weathered old hostler to feed and water the horses. Inside the boarding house, a tired-looking woman served them stew that tasted like it had been sitting since yesterday and bread hard enough to use as a weapon. Caleb ate mechanically, his eyes heavy. Eliza picked at her food without appetite. Garrick forced himself to eat, knowing he'd need the energy for whatever came next. You folks look like you're running from something, the woman said as she refilled their coffee. Just traveling, Garrick replied. Uh-huh. She didn't sound convinced. Had some men through here this morning asking about a mountain man with a woman and a half-breed child. Told them I hadn't seen anyone matching that description. Garrick's hand moved closer to his rifle. Why'd you lie for us? The woman shrugged. Didn't like their attitude. Didn't like the way they talked about a child like he was a problem to solve. She looked at Caleb with something like sympathy. Boys got kind eyes. Reminds me of my grandson. Figured whoever's chasing you probably doesn't deserve to catch you. Thank you, Eliza said quietly. Don't thank me. Just get wherever you're going fast. Those men look serious, professional-like. They finished eating and were heading back to the wagon when a rider came tearing into the station from the north, his horse lathered with sweat. He barely waited for the animal to stop before jumping down and running toward the boarding house. Fire, he shouted. Whole damn settlement of Willow Creek's burning. Railroad men torched it. People poured out of buildings, surrounding the rider with questions. Garrick caught pieces of the story through the chaos. Victor Grange's hired men had ridden into Willow Creek at dawn, claimed the settlement was harboring fugitives, and when the townspeople refused to cooperate, they'd set fire to the general store and the livery. Anyone hurt? Someone asked. Old man who runs the store got beat pretty bad. Few others with burns trying to put out the fires. The rider was shaking with anger and exhaustion. They said they'd burn every settlement in the territory until someone turned over the documents they're looking for. Eliza made a small sound of horror. Garrick felt cold rage settle in his gut. This is because of us, Eliza whispered, because we wouldn't surrender the papers. This is because Victor Grange is a monster using terror to get what he wants, Garrick corrected. Not the same thing. Tell that to the people whose homes are burning. Garrick couldn't argue with that. He helped Eliza and Caleb into the wagon, ignored the curious stares from the crowd, and drove out of Crossroads Creek with the sound of angry voices fading behind them. They traveled in silence for an hour before Eliza spoke again. We should give him the documents. End this before more people get hurt. He'll burn settlements anyway. Men like Grange don't stop when they get what they want. They just find new things to want. But if we surrender those papers, Caleb loses everything his father died for. And Grange gets away with terrorizing innocent people because it worked. Garrick kept his eyes on the road. Only way to stop men like him is to stand against them. Make the cost of their cruelty higher than the profit. How? We're two people with a child in a wagon. He's got money, hired guns, legal authority. He's also got a conscience buried somewhere under all that greed. Everyone does. I don't think Victor Grange has a conscience. Then we find people who do, and we make them see what's really happening here. The road to Fort Resolute climbed gradually into foothills that promised mountains beyond. The landscape changed from scrubland to scattered pine forest, the air growing cooler and cleaner with elevation. Caleb fell asleep again in the wagon bed, exhausted from fear and travel. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they spotted another group of travelers ahead, a small caravan of 3 wagons moving slowly eastward. Garrick slowed their approach, wary of strangers, but as they got closer, he recognized the lead wagon. Marcus Finch. The old trader saw them and immediately pulled his wagon to a halt, climbing down with a grin that faded as he took in their condition, dust-covered, exhausted, clearly fleeing something. Eliza? Garrick. What the hell happened? In quick, tired sentences, Eliza explained everything. The confrontation in Copper Hollow, Grange's threats, the hired guns at Raven Ridge, the burning of Willow Creek. Marcus's expression grew darker with each revelation. That son of a bitch, Marcus said when she'd finished. Torching settlements? He's gone completely mad. He's desperate, Garrick corrected, which makes him dangerous. Marcus turned to his traveling companions, 2 other traders, and a family of settlers heading east to stake a claim. You folks go on ahead. I'm staying with these people. Marcus, you don't have to, Eliza started. The hell I don't. That boy's safety is my responsibility until you can protect him properly. And right now you need help. Marcus climbed into his wagon and started transferring supplies. Besides, I know Fort Resolute better than you do. Know which lawyers might actually take your case instead of selling you out to Grange. One of the other traders, a young man named Samuel, spoke up. I'll come too. My brother's a clerk at the territorial courthouse. Might be able to help with filing papers, navigating the legal maze. The settler family, a man named John Mercer, his wife Anne, and their 3 children, exchanged glances. Then John said, We'll come as well. Safety in numbers. And if there's testimony needed about Grange's tactics, we saw the smoke from Willow Creek. Can speak to that. Garrick felt something loosen in his chest. They weren't alone anymore. Weren't just 2 desperate people running toward an uncertain hope. They had allies now, people willing to stand against power because it was right, not because it benefited them. Thank you, he said simply. Don't thank us yet, John replied. We might all end up in jail or worse for this. Probably, Marcus agreed cheerfully, but at least we'll have good company. They traveled together as the sun sank toward the western horizon. 6 wagons now instead of 1, the adults taking turns keeping watch while Caleb and the Mercer children slept. Around the evening campfire, they planned their approach. Fort Resolute has maybe 24 lawyers, Marcus said, chewing on jerky. Most are in Grange's pocket one way or another. Railroad pays well for legal cooperation. But there's one, Abraham Sutton. Old bastard, stubborn as a rock, hates corruption more than he loves money. If anyone will take your case, it's him. And if he won't? Eliza asked. Then we keep trying until someone does. Or we make enough noise that public opinion forces the territorial government to act. Public opinion? Eliza repeated skeptically. In case you haven't noticed, public opinion about half-breed children isn't exactly favorable. Public opinion about burning settlements to intimidate witnesses is even less favorable, Samuel pointed out, especially if we can get the story into the territorial newspaper. Editor there is a man named Wyatt Cross. He's printed criticism of the railroad before. Printed criticism and actually standing against them are different things, Ann Mercer said quietly. Her face was lined with worry. We're taking a big risk here, all of us. We are, her husband agreed, but someone has to. Otherwise, men like Grange just keep taking and hurting and calling it business. They slept in shifts, keeping watch through the night. Garrick took the last watch before dawn, sitting with his rifle while the others slept and the stars wheeled overhead. He thought about Raven Ridge, wondered if Grange's men had reached it yet, if they'd burned his cabin out of spite or just ransacked it looking for the documents. Didn't matter. The cabin was just wood and nails. What mattered was the people sleeping in the wagons around him. Eliza and Caleb and all these strangers who'd chosen to stand with them despite the risk. That was worth more than any building. Fort Resolute appeared on the horizon around mid-morning, a sprawling settlement built around an old military installation with wooden buildings spreading outward from the stone fort like ripples from a dropped stone. The territorial courthouse sat at the center of town, a 2-story structure that tried for dignity and mostly achieved bureaucratic grimness. They pulled the wagons into a public lot near the courthouse. Marcus led them to an office building on the edge of the business district, climbing stairs to the 2nd floor and knocking on a door marked A. Sutton, attorney at law. A voice from inside called, "It's unlocked unless you're trying to serve me papers, in which case it's barred and I've got a shotgun." Marcus grinned. Same old Abraham. He pushed the door open. The office was chaos. Papers stacked everywhere, law books piled on every surface, a desk buried under documents and coffee cups. Behind that desk sat a man in his 70s with wild white hair, spectacles perched on his nose, and the look of someone who'd spent 50 years fighting losing battles and couldn't quite quit. Abraham Sutton looked up as they entered. Marcus Finch, Haven't seen you in 6 months. You finally get arrested for smuggling. Not yet. Brought you a case instead. I'm retired. You say that every time I see you. Still seems to be practicing law. Only for clients who can afford my rates. How much? Whatever Victor Grange is paying you to go away, doubled. Garrick stepped forward. We can't pay anything. We're here because we have nowhere else to go and a child who deserves better than the hand he's been dealt. Sutton studied Garrick over his spectacles. Mountain man by the look of you, and you're the woman from the workhouse auction everyone's talking about, and that must be the child in question. His eyes settled on Caleb, who was hiding behind Eliza's skirts. Half Navajo? His father was Daniel Tsosi, Eliza said. Died in service protecting settlers. Caleb has legitimate inheritance rights to land the railroad wants. And Victor Grange is trying to invalidate those rights through legal manipulation and intimidation, Sutton finished. I've heard. Also heard he burned Willow Creek yesterday looking for you. Nasty business. Will you help us? Garrick asked. Sutton was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He poured for himself and Garrick without asking. I defended a Navajo family against railroad seizure 15 years ago, Sutton said. Used every legal trick I knew, cited every precedent, made the best arguments of my career. Lost anyway. Judge ruled in favor of the railroad. Family got relocated to a reservation, died of disease within 2 years. He drank his whiskey in one swallow. After that, I stopped taking cases I knew I'd lose. So you won't help us, Eliza said flatly. Didn't say that. Said I stopped taking cases I knew I'd lose. Sutton poured another drink. This case? I don't know if we'll lose. Grange has power, but he's overplayed his hand. Burning settlements, hiring thugs, using terror tactics. That's not legal maneuvering. That's tyranny. And even corrupt judges get nervous about appearing to support tyranny when public opinion turns against it. So you'll take the case? Marcus asked. Show me the documents first. Eliza handed over the leather case. Sutton spent 20 minutes examining every paper. The treaty copies, military records, land grants, letters from Daniel's commanding officers. His expression grew more animated with each page. This is solid, he muttered. Better than solid. This is ironclad proof of inheritance rights, military service, treaty protections. If we can get this in front of an honest judge with proper media coverage, he looked up at Garrick. We might actually win this. What do we need to do? Garrick asked. First, file emergency custody papers establishing you as Caleb's legal guardian. That blocks Grange's attempt to seize him through territorial courts. Second, file a property claim on behalf of Caleb asserting his inheritance rights. Third, get testimony from witnesses about Grange's intimidation tactics on record. Fourth, get this story to Wyatt Cross at the newspaper before Grange can control the narrative. How long will all that take? If we work fast. 2 days to file papers and gather testimony. Another day for the newspaper story to run. Then depends on how quickly the court schedules hearings. Sutton pulled out fresh paper and started writing. But here's the problem. The moment we file these papers, Grange will know exactly where you are. He'll come with everything he's got. Legal challenges, hired guns, political pressure. You need to be ready for that. We're ready, Garrick said. Are you? Because I've seen what Grange does to people who stand against him. He doesn't just win. He destroys. Ruins reputations, bankrupts families, sometimes worse. Sutton met Garrick's eyes. You start this fight, there's no backing down. No negotiating. It goes all the way to the end, whatever that end looks like. The end where Caleb gets to grow up free and safe? Hopefully. Or the end where you're all dead or imprisoned and Grange takes the land anyway. Those are the options? Those are always the options when you fight power with principle. Garrick looked at Eliza. She looked back at him, her hand on Caleb's shoulder, her jaw set with determination that reminded him of the first time he'd seen her, standing on that auction platform, silent and strong, refusing to break even when the whole world was laughing. We're not backing down, Eliza said. Sutton smiled grimly. Good. Then let's go to war. They spent the rest of the day in coordinated chaos. Sutton drafted legal papers while his clerk, a young woman named Elizabeth, who worked faster than anyone Garrick had ever seen, copied documents and filed them with the courthouse. Samuel used his brother's connections to schedule testimony hearings and navigate bureaucratic obstacles. Marcus and John Mercer went to find Wyatt Cross at the newspaper office. Garrick stayed with Eliza and Caleb, keeping watch, knowing Grange's people would be coming soon. The question wasn't if, but when. Around sunset, Marcus returned from the newspaper office with Wyatt Cross in tow, a lean man in his 40s with ink-stained fingers and the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent a lifetime looking for truth in places people tried to hide it. "This true?" Cross asked without preamble, holding up the notes Marcus had given him. "Grange burned Willow Creek?" "We saw the smoke ourselves," John Mercer confirmed, "and the writer who brought news said it was railroad men acting on Grange's orders." Cross was already scribbling in a notebook. "And the child, Caleb Tsosi, has documented inheritance rights to land Grange wants?" "Ironclad documentation," Sutton said, spreading papers across his desk. "Treaty rights, military service, legal land grants, everything legitimate and properly filed. Grange is trying to erase the boy's existence because it's cheaper than buying the land legally." "Can I quote you on that?" "Quote me on all of it. Put it on the front page if you've got the spine." Cross grinned. "Mister, I've been waiting years for someone to give me a story big enough to take down Victor Grange. Consider it done." He left to write the story, and Sutton turned to Garrick. "Papers are filed. Testimonies scheduled for day after tomorrow. Newspaper story runs in the morning edition. After that, the whole territory will know what's happening here." "After that, Grange declares war," Garrick said. "Probably, which is why you folks shouldn't stay in one place tonight. He'll send people looking." "Where should we go?" Marcus spoke up. "I know a warehouse on the edge of town. Owner owes me a favor. You can sleep there, out of sight." They gathered their things and relocated to the warehouse, a large building that smelled like grain and motor oil, with enough space to park all the wagons inside and bar the doors. The Mercer children bedded down in one corner while the adults took turns on watch. Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat with Eliza, asking questions she tried to answer honestly without terrifying him. "Are we going to be okay?" he asked. "I hope so, baby. What if the bad men find us? Then Garrick and Marcus and all these good people will protect us." "What if they can't?" Eliza pulled him close. "Then I'll protect you, always, no matter what." Garrick sat nearby, listening, his rifle across his lap. He thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Grange could buy the judge, could send enough hired guns that even a warehouse full of determined people couldn't hold them off, could use political connections to invalidate the treaties or declare Caleb's documentation fraudulent. But they'd done everything they could, filed the right papers, gathered testimony, got the truth into the newspaper. The rest was up to forces beyond their control: the law, public opinion, the basic human capacity to choose right over easy. Not great odds, but better than hiding on a mountain waiting for the axe to fall. Morning came with the sound of shouting outside the warehouse. Garrick was on watch and immediately went to the door, peering through a gap in the boards. A crowd had gathered in the street, maybe 50 people, holding newspapers, their voices rising in anger. At first, Garrick thought they were angry at him, at Eliza and Caleb. Then he realized they were reading Cross's story, reading about Willow Creek burning, about a 5-year-old child hunted for the crime of inheritance, about Victor Grange using terror to steal land. "This is wrong," someone shouted. "Burning settlements, hunting children. This is tyranny. Railroad thinks it can do whatever it wants because it's got money. Someone needs to stand against this." Marcus appeared beside Garrick, looking out at the crowd with satisfaction. "Public opinion's a funny thing. Can turn on a dime when you give people the right story." "Think it's enough?" "Enough to make Grange nervous. Maybe enough to make the territorial government think twice about backing him blindly." Marcus paused. "Won't stop him, though. He's in too deep now, committed too many crimes to back down without facing consequences. He'll come at you with everything he's got. Let him come." But Grange didn't come, not directly. Instead, a messenger arrived at noon with a summons. Abraham Sutton, Garrick Hale, and Eliza Boone were ordered to appear in court that afternoon for emergency proceedings regarding custody and land rights of minor Caleb Tsosi. "That's fast," Sutton said, reading the summons. "Too fast. Grange must have pulled serious strings to get a hearing scheduled this quickly." "Is that bad?" Eliza asked. "Could be. Means he's panicking, wants to resolve this before public opinion solidifies against him. But it also means he's bringing everything he's got to this fight." Sutton started gathering papers. "We're as ready as we'll ever be. Just remember, in the courtroom, stay calm. Answer questions honestly. Let me handle the legal arguments. And whatever happens, don't let them provoke you into saying something that gives them ammunition." They arrived at the courthouse an hour before the hearing. The building was surrounded by people, some from the morning crowd, others who'd come out of curiosity or conviction. News had spread fast about the case and what it represented. Inside, the courtroom was already packed. Garrick spotted Doc Hendricks and Ruth Callahan in the gallery, along with faces he recognized from Copper Hollow and settlements throughout the territory. People who'd come to bear witness, to show that this mattered to more than just one family. Victor Grange sat at the plaintiff's table with 3 lawyers in expensive suits, looking confident and angry in equal measure. When he saw Garrick and Eliza enter, his eyes went cold and hard. The judge entered, a man named Morrison, the same judge who'd given Grange that initial opinion about seizing Caleb. Not a promising sign. Morrison banged his gavel. "This is an emergency hearing regarding custody and property rights of minor child Caleb Tsosie. Mr. Grange, as plaintiff, you may begin." One of Grange's lawyers stood, smoothly presenting arguments about territorial regulations, proper custody procedures, the need to protect children of mixed heritage from unsuitable environments. He made it sound reasonable, responsible, like concern for Caleb's welfare instead of naked land grab. Then Sutton stood and systematically destroyed every argument, cited precedents, rid from Daniel Tsosie's military records, presented testimony from Doc Hendricks about Daniel's heroism. Established that Eliza was Caleb's biological mother with every right to custody. Proved that Garrick's guardianship petition was legally sound and supported by community witnesses. Judge Morrison listened with a face like carved stone, giving nothing away. Then Grange's lawyer changed tactics. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Miss Boone deliberately concealed this child's existence while in territorial custody at the workhouse, that she falsified records and committed fraud to hide him from proper authorities." Eliza went pale. Garrick felt his hands clench into fists. "Can you prove this fraud?" Morrison asked. "We can, Your Honor. We have testimony from the workhouse matron, Mrs. Calhoun, who will state that Miss Boone never declared a dependent child during intake processing." Sutton shot to his feet. "Your Honor, the workhouse intake form doesn't require declaration of children not in physical custody. Miss Boone's son was being cared for by a third party during her workhouse term. She broke no laws and committed no fraud." Nevertheless, Grange's lawyer continued, "the pattern of concealment suggests unfitness for custody. Combined with her relationship with Mr. Hale, a man with no legal connection to the child, we believe the minor would be better served in territorial custody pending full investigation." "That's a lie," Eliza burst out. "You don't care about Caleb's welfare. You just want him gone so you can steal his land." Morrison banged his gavel. "Miss Boone, control yourself or I'll have you removed from this courtroom." "Your Honor," Sutton said quickly, "if I may present additional evidence." The courtroom doors burst open. A woman entered, dressed in traditional Navajo clothing, her long black hair streaked with gray. She walked down the center aisle with quiet dignity, every eye in the room following her. Garrick didn't know who she was, but Eliza made a sound like all the air had been punched from her lungs. The woman reached the front of the courtroom and addressed Judge Morrison directly. "My name is Ayanna Tsosie. I am Daniel Tsosie's sister, and I have come to speak for my nephew, Caleb." The entire courtroom erupted in whispers and confusion. Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. When silence finally fell, Ayanna continued, "I have traveled for 3 weeks to reach this place. I came because word reached our people that Daniel's son was in danger, that men driven by greed sought to erase him from existence to steal land that belongs to him by birth and blood." Grange's face had gone red with fury. His lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this woman has no standing in these proceedings." "Whoa! This woman is the child's aunt," Sutton interrupted. "She has every standing to speak to custody and welfare." Morrison looked torn. Finally, he said, "I'll allow testimony, but keep it brief." Ayanna turned to face the gallery, her voice clear and strong. "My brother Daniel was a good man. He served this country with honor, protected people who often treated our people with contempt and hatred. He fell in love with Eliza Boone, and they planned a life together. When he died, she carried their child and raised him alone because she had no family to help her." Ayanna looked at Eliza. "I did not know about Caleb until recently. If I had known, I would have come sooner." Would have helped. But I am here now. What are you asking this court for? Morrison asked. I am asking that my nephew be allowed to remain with his mother who loves him. That he be protected from men who see him as an obstacle instead of a child. That his inheritance rights my brother died believing would secure his son's future, be honored instead of stolen. She turned to Grange, and I am telling Victor Grange and all men like him that the Sosi family will not be erased, will not be intimidated, will stand and fight for what is ours. The courtroom erupted in applause. Morrison banged his gavel, but the applause continued, growing louder, people standing now, showing support. Garrick watched Grange's face and saw something there that looked almost like fear. The tide was turning. Morrison finally restored order by threatening to clear the courtroom entirely. The applause died down, but the energy remained, a crackling tension that felt like lightning about to strike. Grange's lead lawyer stood, his composure cracking at the edges. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We object to testimony from... sorry. Your objection is noted and overruled, Morrison said, cutting him off. The judge's expression had shifted during Ayana's testimony, something calculating happening behind his eyes. Miss Sosi, you claim familial connection to the child. Can you prove it? Ayana reached into a woven bag at her side and produced a bundle of papers and photographs. I have letters from my brother Daniel, photographs of our family, documentation showing my relationship to him. She handed them to the clerk, who brought them to Morrison. The judge examined each item carefully while the courtroom held its collective breath. Finally, he looked up. These appear legitimate, which complicates the custody question considerably. We have a biological mother, a legal guardian petition from an unrelated party, and now a blood relative from the father's side. He turned to Eliza. Miss Boone, what is your relationship with Miss Sosi? Eliza stood, her voice shaking slightly. We've never met before today, Your Honor. I didn't know Daniel had a sister. He never mentioned family. Did you attempt to contact his family after his death? I didn't know how, didn't know where to look, and I was... She stopped, swallowed hard. I was scared. Scared that they'd take Caleb from me, that I'd lose the only piece of Daniel I had left. So you hid the child. I protected him. There's a difference. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Miss Sosi, what are you asking this court for? Custody of your nephew. The question hung in the air. Garrick saw Eliza's face go white, saw her hands grip the table edge hard enough that her knuckles went bloodless. Ayana looked at Eliza for a long moment. Then she spoke directly to her, not to the judge. I came here angry, Ayana said. Angry that Daniel's son existed and nobody told me. Angry that I'd been denied the chance to know my brother's child. I came ready to fight for custody, to take Caleb home to our people where he belonged. She paused. But then I watched you in this courtroom, saw the way you hold yourself, the way you speak about my nephew, the fear in your eyes when I said Daniel's name. Eliza was crying now, silent tears running down her face. You love him, Ayana continued, not because of blood or obligation. You love him because he is your son in every way that matters. And he loves you. I can see it even though he's not in this room. A child's love doesn't lie. She turned back to Morrison. I am not asking for custody, Your Honor. I am asking that my nephew remain with the woman who raised him, the woman who kept him safe when everyone else wanted him erased. And I am asking that this court honor my brother's sacrifice by protecting his son's inheritance rights instead of letting greedy men steal them. The courtroom erupted again, but this time Morrison let it happen. Let the applause and the voices wash over the proceedings like a cleansing wave. When it finally quieted, Ayana walked to where Eliza stood and took her hands. Daniel chose you, she said softly. He saw something in you worth loving, worth building a life with. I see it too. She squeezed Eliza's hands. We will both be his mothers, both love him, both protect him. Yes? Eliza nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Grange stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. Your Honor, this is a touching scene, but it changes nothing. The territorial regulations, Morrison interrupted, were designed to protect children, not to enable land theft disguised as legal proceedings. He shuffled papers on his bench. I've read the documentation Miss Sosi brought. I've read Mr. Sutton's briefs. I've heard testimony about Daniel Sosi's military service and heroism. And I've read this morning's newspaper article about Willow Creek burning. Grange's face went red. That article is full of unsubstantiated allegations. Are you saying your men didn't burn Willow Creek? I'm saying the newspaper story is biased and answer the question, Mr. Grange. Did your employees burn Willow Creek while searching for these people? Grange's lawyers were whispering urgently to him. Finally, he said, there was an unfortunate incident involving fire, but it was not intentional arson. Did people get hurt? Some minor injuries, but did you authorize your men to use intimidation and violence to recover documents you claim belong to you? The documents in question are relevant to ongoing legal. Morrison banged his gavel hard enough to crack it. That's a yes. You authorized terrorism to support a land grab in my courtroom while asking me to rule in your favor. He leaned forward. Mr. Grange, I may be many things, but I'm not a fool, and I'm not deaf to public opinion when it's this loud and this clear. Your Honor, the railroad has significant interests. The railroad's interests end where basic human decency begins. Morrison started writing. I'm ruling as follows. Custody of minor Caleb Sosi is awarded to his biological mother, Eliza Boone, with legal guardianship support from Garrick Hale and familial support from Ayanna Tsosi. The child's inheritance rights under the 1854 treaty are recognized as legitimate and legally binding. Any attempt to challenge these rights through intimidation or violence will be prosecuted as criminal conspiracy. The courtroom exploded in cheers. Garrick felt something tight in his chest release, felt Eliza grab his arm hard enough to bruise, felt the weight of weeks of fear finally lift. Morrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into Victor Grange's business practices in this territory, specifically regarding the burning of Willow Creek and other acts of intimidation. Sheriff Barrett, I'm deputizing you to conduct that investigation with full territorial authority. Barrett, who'd been standing near the back of the courtroom, nodded grimly. Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Grange, Morrison continued, you are hereby barred from any contact with the Boone family, the Tsosi family, or any witnesses in this case pending the outcome of that investigation. Violate this order, and you'll be held in contempt and jailed. Am I clear? Grange's face had gone from red to purple. This is outrageous. I'll appeal to the territorial governor. Appeal to whoever you want. This ruling stands. Morrison banged his gavel one final time. Court adjourned. Chaos erupted. People surging forward, voices raised in celebration and anger, lawyers shouting objections that nobody was listening to anymore. Garrick pulled Eliza and Ayanna toward the side exit, Marcus and Sutton running interference, while Barrett and his deputies formed a barrier between them and Grange's furious lawyers. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown to hundreds. Word had spread fast about the ruling, and people were celebrating in the streets like Copper Hollow had just won a war. Maybe they had. Caleb came running from where the Mercer family had been keeping him safe, launching himself into Eliza's arms with enough force to nearly knock her over. She caught him, held him, buried her face in his hair while he cried and laughed at the same time. Is it over, Mama? Are we safe? We're safe, baby. We're safe. Ayanna stood nearby, watching with an expression that mixed joy and grief in equal measure, seeing her nephew for the first time, seeing her brother's face reflected in a 5-year-old boy who didn't know her. Eliza noticed and pulled back from Caleb, keeping one hand on his shoulder. Caleb, there's someone I need you to meet. This is your Aunt Ayanna. She's your papa's sister. Caleb looked up at Ayanna with wide, cautious eyes. My papa's sister? Yes. Ayanna knelt down to his level, tears streaming down her face. Your papa was my little brother. I loved him very much. And I already love you, even though we just met. Do I look like him? You have his eyes and his smile. Ayanna's voice cracked. He would be so proud of you. Caleb thought about this seriously. Then he asked, Can I have 2 mamas? Eliza and Ayanna both laughed through their tears. Yes, Eliza said. You can have 2 mamas, if that's what you want. Okay. Caleb processed this with the easy acceptance of childhood, then looked at Garrick. And Garrick can be my friend who takes care of us. I can do that, Garrick said quietly. They stood there in the courthouse square while celebration swirled around them, this strange, impossible family that had formed out of desperation and choice, held together by something stronger than blood or law. Marcus clapped Garrick on the shoulder. You did it, you stubborn bastard. Actually won. We did it, Garrick corrected. All of us. Sutton emerged from the courthouse looking exhausted but satisfied. I've practiced law for 50 years. Never seen a judge reverse himself that completely based on public pressure and basic decency. Gives me hope for the territory. Will it stick? Eliza asked. The ruling? Or will Grange find a way around it? He'll try. Men like him always try. But Morrison's investigation order means Grange has bigger problems than land rights now. If Barrett does his job properly, Grange could face criminal charges for the Willow Creek burning. Sutton paused. Won't solve everything. Territory's still corrupt, still broken in 100 ways. But you've put a crack in the armor, shown that ordinary people can stand against power when they stand together. Over the next few days, that truth played out in ways both large and small. The territorial newspaper ran follow-up stories about Grange's intimidation tactics and the Willow Creek burning. Other settlements came forward with their own stories of railroad bullying and forced land sales. Public outcry grew loud enough that even corrupt politicians had to pay attention. Sheriff Barrett conducted his investigation with surprising thoroughness, interviewing witnesses, documenting damages, building a case against Grange that went beyond civil disputes into criminal territory. Within a week, 3 of Grange's hired guns were arrested for arson. The railroad agent himself fled to the territorial capital, but his influence was crumbling. Garrick, Eliza, Caleb, and Ayanna returned to Raven Ridge to find the cabin untouched. Grange's men had apparently decided that burning it wasn't worth the risk, with public attention focused on them. They spent a week repairing fences, restocking supplies, and slowly settling into a new normal. Ayanna proved surprisingly adaptable to mountain life, bringing knowledge of plants and traditional medicines that complemented Garrick's practical skills. She and Eliza developed an easy partnership, sharing Caleb's care without competition or resentment. One evening, as the sun set over the peaks and Caleb slept inside after a long day of helping with chores, the 3 adults sat outside drinking coffee. What happens now? Eliza asked. With Caleb's land rights, do we try to claim the property, build something there? Ayanna considered this. The land was sacred to our people before it was divided by treaties and agreements. My brother wanted to honor that while also building a future for his family. Perhaps we do the same. How? Garrick asked. We claim the land legally, use it in ways that honor both cultures, perhaps a ranch that employs people from both communities, perhaps a school that teaches both traditions, something that proves different people can build together instead of fighting over scraps. That's ambitious, Eliza said. My brother died for ambitious ideas. Seems wrong to honor him with small ones. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. I never thanked you properly, Eliza said to Garrick, for everything, for buying my contract at the auction, for taking me in, for fighting for Caleb when you had no reason to. I had a reason. What reason? Garrick thought about Sam Cord and the promise he'd made, about 5 years of loneliness on this mountain, about the moment he'd seen Eliza standing on that auction platform, silent and strong, refusing to break even when the world told her she was worthless. Someone once told me that we're measured by what we do when nobody's looking, he said finally, but I think we're also measured by what we do when everyone's looking and it would be easier to turn away. You stood there taking abuse from an entire town and didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't apologize for existing. That kind of strength deserves respect, deserves protection. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and standing anyway. Eliza was quiet for a moment. You know what the hardest part was? Not the mockery or the rejection. It was believing I deserved better, believing Caleb deserved better. I'd spent so long being told I was worthless that I'd almost started believing it. What changed? You did. You looked at me and saw a person worth saving. Didn't ask for anything in return. Didn't expect gratitude or servitude, just gave me space to remember who I was before the world tried to break me. She turned to look at him. That's a gift I can never repay. Don't want repayment. Want you and Caleb to be happy, to build a life without fear. That's payment enough. Ayanna spoke up quietly. My people have a saying, we are all connected in the great circle of life. What we do for others, we do for ourselves. What we take from others, we take from ourselves. You honored that circle, Garrick Hale, even if you didn't know the words. Sam Cord taught me something similar. called it being human instead of just surviving. Your friend was wise. He was. Wish you could have met him. They sat under the stars talking until the fire burned down to embers, sharing stories and plans, and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd actually built something worth keeping. 6 months passed. Winter came to Raven Ridge, blanketing the mountains in snow and turning the cabin into a warm island in a frozen world. Caleb learned to read under Ayana's patient teaching and helped Garrick with winter chores, growing stronger and more confident every day. The territory changed too, slowly but visibly. Victor Grange was indicted on multiple charges related to the Willow Creek burning and intimidation of witnesses. He fled the territory entirely before trial, leaving his railroad schemes and collapse behind him. Other corrupt officials, seeing public opinion shift, became suddenly interested in enforcing laws they'd ignored for years. Doc Hendricks and Ruth Callahan became regular visitors to Raven Ridge, bringing supplies and news from Copper Hollow. The town itself was changing, some people openly expressing regret about the auction and the way they'd treated Eliza. Not everyone, some prejudices ran too deep to shift, but enough that she could visit without feeling hunted. Marcus Finch stopped by in early spring, his wagons loaded with trade goods and a smile on his weathered face. Heard from Abraham Sutton. Caleb's land claim was officially recognized by territorial court. You folks own 1,000 acres of prime ranch land now. What do we do with 1,000 acres? Eliza asked. Whatever you want. That's the beauty of ownership. Marcus pulled out a bottle and poured drinks for the adults, to winning against impossible odds. They drank to that, and to other victories large and small. In late spring, they broke ground on the land Caleb had inherited. Not a grand mansion or a factory, but something simpler. A community ranch that would employ people from multiple communities, native and settler alike. Ayana brought families from her nation who needed work. Ruth Callahan brought settlers who'd been displaced by railroad schemes. Garrick and Eliza built bunkhouses and corrals, creating something that looked suspiciously like hope. They named it Mercy Ridge, after the mountain where everything had changed. Above the main barn, Garrick carved a sign that read, "All welcome here" in English on one side and Navajo on the other. The first season was hard. Some people refused to work alongside others. Equipment broke, money ran short. There were fights and walkouts and moments when failure seemed inevitable. But they persisted, learned to work together, found common ground in shared labor and shared meals. Slowly, impossibly, the ranch became something real. On a warm day in early summer, almost a year after that auction in Copper Hollow, Garrick stood on the ridge overlooking the ranch and the valley beyond. Caleb was down below, playing with other children while their parents worked. Eliza and Ayana were teaching a group of women how to preserve vegetables for winter. Marcus was arguing cheerfully with a supplier about prices. It looked like community, like family, like the kind of thing Sam Cord would have been proud to see. Eliza climbed the ridge to join him, wiping sweat from her forehead. "What are you doing up here?" "Thinking." About how none of this should have worked. By all reasonable measures, we should have lost, should have been crushed by money and power and the weight of how things have always been. But we weren't. No, we weren't. Garrick looked at her. You know why? Because we got lucky? Because we refused to accept the world's verdict on our worth. You stood on that auction platform and refused to believe you were worthless. Caleb existed in a world that wanted him erased and refused to disappear. Ayana came from across the territory because family mattered more than convenience. He paused. We won because we acted like we deserved to win. And eventually, enough other people believed it too. Eliza was quiet, looking down at the ranch, at the life they'd built from desperation and determination. You think it'll last? Nothing lasts forever, but yeah, I think it'll last long enough to matter. Long enough for Caleb to grow up knowing his worth. Long enough for other people to see that different folks can build together instead of tearing each other apart. That's optimistic for you. I'm full of surprises. She laughed and leaned against him, and they stood there watching their impossible community work and play and exist in defiance of everyone who'd said it couldn't be done. That night they gathered everyone for a meal, dozens of people from different backgrounds and beliefs, sharing food and stories around a massive bonfire. Children ran wild in the firelight while adults talked and laughed and argued good-naturedly about everything from cattle breeding to the best way to preserve meat. Caleb sat between Eliza and Ayana, his face bright with happiness, telling an elaborate story about a horse he'd helped birth that morning. He'd grown taller in the past year, his voice stronger, his eyes less haunted by fear. He was just a boy now, not a problem to solve or a claim to validate, just a boy growing up surrounded by people who loved him. Garrick caught Abraham Sutton's eye across the fire. The old lawyer had ridden out to see the ranch, claiming he wanted to check on his most satisfying victory. He raised his glass in a silent toast. Garrick raised his coffee cup in return. Later, when the fire had burned low and children were being carried to beds, Eliza found Garrick one more time. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "What's that?" "About that day in Copper Hollow, when you threw down that silver dollar and bought my contract. I asked you why once, and you said it was because I needed helping. That's still true. But it wasn't the whole truth, was it? You could have helped lots of people, could have bought the prettier girl's contract, the one who went first, could have done 100 other things with that dollar." Garrick considered lying, considered deflecting, then decided Eliza deserved honesty. "You reminded me of someone. Of myself, I guess. Before Sam Cord found me and showed me there was another way to live besides just surviving. You had that same look, like you'd forgotten there was any option besides endurance. And you wanted to show me there was. Something like that. Did it work?" Garrick looked at this ranch, at the community, at Caleb laughing with other children in the distance. "What do you think?" Eliza smiled. "I think a silver dollar was the best investment either of us ever made." She walked away to help settle children for the night, and Garrick stood alone under the stars thinking about Sam Cord, about promises kept, about the strange way lives intersected and changed each other. He thought about the auction platform in Eliza's silence, about the moment Caleb had called him friend, about Ayanna traveling for weeks because family mattered, about a judge finding his conscience under public pressure, about ordinary people standing against power because someone else stood first. None of it should have worked, but it had. Not perfectly, not without cost or struggle or moments of doubt, but it had worked anyway because sometimes the world surprises you. Sometimes people choose right over easy. Sometimes a single act of decency creates ripples that spread farther than you ever imagined. Garrick thought about the sign above the barn. "All welcome here." Simple words that carried the weight of revolution in a territory built on division and exclusion. He'd started with a promise to Sam Cord, a vow to help people when he could, how he could. He'd ended up with a family, a community, and proof that the world could change if enough people decided it should. Not a bad return on a silver dollar. The fire finally died to embers. Garrick banked it properly, checked on the horses one last time, and walked toward the cabin where Eliza and Caleb and Ayanna waited. His family, in all the ways that mattered. Behind him, Mercy Ridge slept under the stars, full of people who'd been told they didn't belong, didn't matter, didn't deserve better. They'd proved the world wrong. And tomorrow, they'd do it again.